going to get started. Not too bad, only 7 minutes late. My name is John Tui Morales. Most people know me from my TV stage name of John Morales. I'm a meteorologist, have worked 40 years in the profession, a proud former civil servant, part of NOAA and the National Weather Service, that very important backbone of what goes on with weather and climate in this country, including research. But after my days at NOAA and the National Weather Service, I spent the bulk of my career as a broadcast meteorologist, both in the Spanish and English languages. Since retiring, and I was just talking to Ann Thompson about this, my wife says that I work more now than I did when I was working. Now I do a lot of consulting. I'm still involved in television as a hurricane specialist for that very same station, the NBC station that I was chief meteorologist for so many years ago. My Cornell involvement does include the advisory board for the Atkinson Center. Very proud of that. Also, the CAL's advisory board, and yes, I am a trustee, alumni elected trustee of the university. So it's a pleasure to be here as your master of ceremonies this morning. I want to welcome the guests, donors, partners, all Cornellians, and thought leaders that are present here today. Now, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to make sure we get to. First and foremost, there were some packets at the door that included the agenda for the day. And some of you did not grab them, but I want to make sure that everybody does have that. So if you would raise your hand, because somebody's going to come to you and bring these. Who did not get one of these? Please raise your hand. Simone in the back and others are handing these out and bringing them to you. Now, so just keep your hand raised while we do that, and I'll go on to some of the other housekeeping items. One of the restrooms is located outside of this room to the left, and there are other restrooms located on the second floor and in the basement in the same location that you'll find them on the second floor, so you can either go up or down for those. I hope you noticed, either when you came in or when you were having breakfast over there at some of the tables, that there are sculptures placed in and around the building. A Cornell professor of human-centered design, Jack Elliott, created these beautiful pieces out of trees. Some are even from Cornell's campus. Jack has loaned this artwork to us for this celebration of Cornell Atkinson and Atkinson Hall. Now, with a generous support of philanthropy, there is an opportunity for these pieces to become a permanent part of Atkinson Hall. More information about Jack and the artwork can be found in those packets and your folders, to be specific, in the folders that you have. All right, so we're here today to celebrate 15 years of progress and impact here at Atkinson Center. It's a celebration of our history, our people, our resources, and strategic investments that have driven a tangible impact. This meeting blends reflection on past achievements with a forward-looking dialogue. If action is the antidote to despair, then I can't think of a better time for us to come together today to chart a path forward, shaping how we will continue to drive meaningful, transformative progress in sustainability. Now, I'm not just a meteorologist or operational meteorologist, as we're known. So basically, I'm in charge of forecasting the weather and warning for potentially very impactful and dangerous weather. And I've done that the bulk of my career. But over the last 30 years or so, I've been very intent on communicating on climate. And I've been very involved in that field as well. I'm in a nonprofit called the Clio Institute on their board of directors in the state of Florida, whose mission is precisely to empower people through education on climate. The more people know about the emergency, the more they will call for action on it, right? So along those lines, obviously what Atkinson does as one of their pillars of action in reducing climate risk was of great interest to me. And that's how I volunteered to be involved in the advisory board for Atkinson, and I've been here for many years. But there are, of course, three other very important pillars to what Atkinson does: accelerating energy transitions, increasing food security, and advancing One Health. And when you look at these collectively, you realize that everything here is related to the other pillar, right? So the mission of Atkinson is transdisciplinary and extremely important. We do have a great lineup of speakers today, but because of how much content we want to cover, I won't have time to tell you the backgrounds, detailed backgrounds of each one of our speakers. So there is a document with speaker bios and pictures in your folders, and you're free to look through them. So now, having done all that introduction, it is time to get on with the program. And for that, I am pleased to welcome to the stage Kavita Bala, our provost for Cornell University, also a computer scientist, entrepreneur, and professor. She is the 17th provost of Cornell University. KB?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Atkinson Hall. How many of you are from out of town? Oh, a lot of you. Wonderful. It's a perfect. Ithaca is gorgeous in spring, summer, and fall. I won't talk about the other season. The other season is long, but hopefully you won't experience it today. So please enjoy Ithaca and Cornell University and this beautiful building. Yesterday, we celebrated the opening of this new building, so you're amongst the first to be here with us, with Dave and Pat Atkinson, Dave is right here, and Pat is right there. Wonderful. Their generosity made this building, not only this hall possible, but also the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability, which is now housed here. So you saw the sign when you walked in over there on the right. Over the past 15 years, Cornell Atkinson has played an increasingly central role in efforts at Cornell to foster interdisciplinary collaborations around sustainability across all of our colleges. In recent years, the center has also sought to connect leading research groups with external organizations, some of whom are represented here. The center builds on a foundation that stretches back to Cornell's beginnings. As a land-grant institution, established on the principle of any person, any study, Cornell has since its early days been a place where research and practice has intersected. In fact, we're famous for that and kind of looked down upon by the other Ivies because we actually care about practice. And our mission was always to do the greatest good for New Yorkers, for the state, and of course, the world at large. That intersection has led to long-standing innovative collaboration between Cornell researchers and those who lead our campus facilities. So I actually it's very unique. We had these living lab experiments on campus, which are just fascinating. So through that collaboration, Cornell has been able to shift 80% of our cooling needs to be fulfilled by lake source cooling. The university has earned a reputation as being the green Ivy, with a commitment to carbon neutrality and high rankings year after year on sustainability. And other experiments around campus, you'll see them, the ones around letting the grass grow longer, et cetera. There's all kinds of wonderful experiments as part of our living lab. Cornell is now investing in a new experiment around earth source heat, which has the potential to replace fossil fuel-powered heating. So talk to Rick Burgess or Lyndon Archer about these projects if you're interested in them. They're really fascinating. They're very fun, really cool engineering, innovation, science ideas that come together to actually have a practical impact. So, I encourage you to learn about them. Today's event, as I said, also marks the first time Atkinson has been used for a large gathering in this space, well, except for the one yesterday. And you'll see that the hall has it's been designed to have spaces where people can collaborate, and that was part of the design so that we could get more interdisciplinary research going. So as you move around in the sessions and over the course of the day, you will get to hear from our distinguished speakers, from panelists, and they are leaders from industry, from NGOs, from government, alongside with Cornell experts. So, make the most of that experience. I hope you enjoy it. They represent the community that's been brought together by the Atkinson Center for the last 15 years. Individuals across sectors and fields from around the world who are approaching the same challenges, but from unique angles. They work to reduce climate risks and power the transition to renewable energy sources. They seek new ways to increase food security and sustainable food systems to better feed the Earth's growing population. And they work together with researchers to advance a One Health approach to creating a thriving future for people and nature. From these speakers and panelists, you will learn about many topics, among them, how Cornell Atkinson, with its innovative way of working and its expert staff, builds and maintains relationships with NGOs, corporations, and government agencies to help focus Cornell's sustainability efforts and translate new research into action and impact. And that's sort of a very critical part of what we care about, is actually having that impact. That's sort of the theme of today. And how Cornell Atkinson has been central to hiring also a new cohort of internationally leading scholars through the Radical Collaboration. This is a provostial initiative, including 5 faculty in 5 different Cornell colleges. That is very unique. Again, that desire to bring together everybody from across campus that drives this center has been critically important and is a model for the rest of campus as we think about new initiatives that require bringing the whole campus together and bringing all disciplines together to solve the challenges of our time. So Cornell Atkinson really is that important experiment in bridge building that we are continuing to benefit from the way it has approached bridge building on campus. So they've brought together the colleges, cross-disciplinary collaboration, as I said, and really brought together scientists who might not normally talk together, along with the world of practice, which many of the people in this room represent. The experiment from our point of view has been an enormous success. As I said, it serves as a model, and it'll continue to lead the way as we seek to address the very urgent challenges of our time. I really want to thank again Dave and Pat Atkinson, who have been amazing supporters of us over the past 15 years. I just want to give them a round of applause. Pat is shaking her head disapprovingly at me, but I'm very grateful. I have to say it. I'm sorry. You'll have to take that thanks from me one more time. I just want to step back. I want to acknowledge the time we're in. I started as provost on Jan 1st, and one of the reasons I took the job is actually I was very excited about being a leader at this very consequential moment in our history. This is a time of incredible opportunity. I happen to be an artificial intelligence researcher. I know what AI can do in terms of enabling new kinds of industry, new kinds of solutions to better health, better medicine, better transportation. So that is, that really motivated me and has driven me for many years now to get into leadership roles as we think about what a university should be in this exciting new world where there's so much opportunity and in a very fast-changing world, a world that changes so fast that society is really not able to keep up with it. And that's actually reflected in the challenge of our time. The challenge of our time is there's this loss of public trust, and at least part of that is that the pace of innovation is so large that the public has responded perhaps through a defensive crouch rather than let's embrace the exciting moment of this, the exciting opportunities of this time. That's why I took the job. I'll say since I took the job, and you know that it's been particularly a difficult week at Cornell this year, it's even more clear that this is a consequential time in our history. What we do now really matters. The future of higher education is at stake. The future of science, discovery, and innovation is at stake. The future of the planet and all of us in it is at stake. That's more true now than it was even 2 months ago. And so what we do here, just keep that in mind as you go through the day. What we do here matters more now than ever before. Keep at it, keep at the good work, and don't back down. So with that, I'll now turn it back to John to get things.
And Provost Bala will have to escape pretty quick from here with all the commitments that are going on at this time. So now I get to introduce someone that's become a friend. Over the course of my years on the advisory board, I've gotten to know David Lodge pretty well. hopefully him to me too, and we've laughed and we've cried. And now we're planning, hopefully, to go hiking in the Smokies once you enter retirement life next year. David Lodge, of course, is the Francis J. DeSalvo Director of the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability and a nationally recognized environmental scientist. David, the stage is yours.
To be clear, John is the only one that has cried. So far, at least famously on the TV set. I am so thrilled that Kavita Bala and Mike Kotlikoff are the leaders of this university, and I don't need to explain. After hearing from KB, I don't need to explain why that is. So it is a time, as KB said, of great challenge and great opportunity. Thank you, John, for being the master of ceremonies today. You've heard from KB. You're going to hear from Mike Kotlikoff later in the day when we have a panel on radical collaborations hires that KB mentioned. In my comments this morning, I want to set the scene for some of what is to come in the program today and invite you into a celebration of what we have accomplished at Cornell Atkinson over its first 15 years. I also want to plant some seeds for our collective thinking and sidebar conversations throughout the day and the evening. Thinking not just about Cornell Atkinson, but about Cornell University, the entire ecosystem, in the same spirit of KB's comments, and thinking about the future of U.S. R&D, of research and development, and what that means in the face of the ongoing very dramatic changes that are emanating from Washington, D.C. So first, let me illustrate how we at Cornell Atkinson think about the role that university research plays in driving positive change in the world. Cornell Atkinson is the hub of sustainability research at Cornell. We drive connections across disciplines, across colleges. So we're very important bringing people together within Cornell University, and this building will become increasingly important, enhancing our mission in that regard. We also want to connect Cornell research to the world outside the university. We want to be influenced. We want Cornell research to be influenced by opportunities in the market and by the needs of policymakers. To that end, we connect Cornell research initiatives with NGOs, with corporations, with government agencies, such as many of you in this room represent. We want increasingly and more effectively and more efficiently to connect Cornell research into practice, the kinds of practices expressed in the market and in government policy. We're interested in creating financially sustainable, scalable solutions to the great sustainability challenges of the world. We're on a quest to better integrate Cornell research into what I think of as this virtuous cycle illustrated on the slide. The virtuous cycle of research and innovation, of course, starting as we do from the university, we think about the top of that diagram as being the center of the universe. But part of what we're about is getting over our own way of thinking like that. And from the perspectives of many of you, you will see the center of the universe in one of those other red balls. And we want to participate in better connecting those and creating this virtuous cycle. If you think about going sort of clockwise on that diagram, we want to better integrate research and innovation into policy. Policy often is critical to enable markets, to create an environment for stable markets. Or if you want to turn the cycle the other way, we want to foster research and innovation that leads to products and practices through commercialization or other means that can be scaled by the markets that in turn often motivate or cry out for improved policy. Let me give you an example at the big scale of what I'm thinking about. In London, for 5 days in 1952, a toxic smog killed at least 4,000 Londoners. When I was a kid, New York City looked like the photograph on the bottom left. Now, those two cities look like the photographs on the right of this slide. This has happened in cities all over the world, and it still needs to happen in many other cities, like those in India. Tremendous gains in human health and ecosystem health resulted from reductions in air pollution, and we continue to get those benefits. Reductions, those kinds of reductions in air pollution, though, were the result of a long and often circuitous, but ultimately virtuous cycle that I illustrated on the previous slide. They're based in years, those kinds of improvements were based in years of research, much of it done in universities and government laboratories, on the causes and consequences of different components of air pollution. How was smog created? In the United States, that research-based information was turned into policies like the Clean Air Act of 1970 that drove the changes in New York City. Such policies have led to iterative improvements in technology that allows us to achieve those gains in improved air pollution. And that's the kind of cycle of research innovation, policy innovation, market innovation that becomes iterative and feeds on itself and brings dividends to us and the rest of the planet. Now, of course, those gains were not free. They required capital and operating expenses from industry and others. In addition, as is often the case, there were trade-offs involved. Recent reductions in air pollution in China, for example, and in reductions in air pollution from the global shipping network, thousands of ships that are plying the oceans every day, have had a side effect that has surprised many. It has increased the rate of global warming. Less air pollution, more sunlight hitting the planet, more warming. Now, I don't think any of us would argue it was the wrong thing to do to continue to drive air pollution down. But my point is that we need, that calls for more turns of that virtuous cycle of innovation. And I could tell you, if I had time, many more grand success stories. If you think back, many of you could do the same over the last 50 years of policy advances and technological advances that have improved the things that we are concerned about in the sustainability realm. We could think about the Green Revolution, enhancing agricultural production. We could think about reversing acidic deposition, removing lead from gasoline, banning DDT, increasing stratospheric ozone. Each of those were dramatic successes, like these air pollution successes, but all of them came with trade-offs. And I'm emphasizing not only the successes, but also the trade-offs, because I think considering trade-offs early and often is a key to solving problems more effectively, more efficiently, and in a way that will be scalable and sustainable. And so I want to think about trade-offs in terms of sort of, it's a way of thinking about optimizing over multiple variables. And I see this as another expression of Bismarck's famous phrase about politics. What's possible is determined by which factors, and indeed which actors, you consider. Whether you bring new ideas to the table, expanding the world of possibilities, and by how much you're willing to pay to get there. And politics is just what we call two or more people trying to make a decision together, right? We often use politics as a pejorative. Well, we're all engaged in it every day, and that's the way we humans make decisions. So I think while it may seem like an obvious point to consider trade-offs, I believe it's actually not often applied so well. In the university realm, well, we tend to think about a narrow slice of a problem and then believe that it's going to solve the whole problem, only to discover that it causes some perturbations in other parts of the system. So the goal of sustainability research, in my view, should be to expand what is possible by considering more carefully the interactions among our sometimes competing goals and by innovating. The new book, Abundance, by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, makes the point powerfully at the sort of macro level, often using the United States as an example. In characterizing the recent history of U.S. environmental policy and related policies, they argue that the left end of the political spectrum has so embraced good government process and litigation as tools to prevent environmental degradation that we are unable now to see that as a society, we've worked our way often into a state of paralysis. In the face of the need, in response to the climate change and others of our priorities, the great need to do much more, much fast, including build some huge systems of infrastructure. And so those on the other end of the political spectrum have embraced the same processes and litigation tactics against progress on climate change to the same effect, paralysis. So Klein and Thompson's point is that a different path is possible. So that's what I'd like for us together to imagine. What are those different paths, whether it's Klein and Thompson's or some other? How can we innovate and build our way to an abundant society? But it will require being able to make more explicit the decisions we make about trading one thing, one good, off against another good. Perfect from one perspective is often not perfect from another perspective. We don't, as we often do or inclined to do in the university, we don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. So here's how we've organized ourselves at Cornell Atkinson to try to expand what is possible in the face of these global, systemic, interrelated problems. We start by defining the goals, the impacts at the right-hand end of that diagram. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What is it that we want to engage Cornell research into solving? Is it an impact? Is it an influence on public opinion, corporate practices, or products, or changed government policies? So only if we start at that right-hand end can we hope to be efficient and effective in accomplishing our mission. So once we've worked at the right-hand end, often already with partners, we're inviting research at Cornell to be influenced by the needs of those external partners, whether they're corporations or government agencies. And then we can match the people, the intellectual expertise and infrastructure at Cornell, represented by the left-hand end of that diagram. We can match that with the needs and opportunities that exist in the world. So finally, when the problem, the goals and the problem and the approach with partners is clear, we add our secret sauce in the middle. And that secret sauce consists of money, thanks to the philanthropic support that we have, the expert staff that is represented by Patrick Berry and his team and the strategic partnerships, and then you'll hear many examples of today, and by the excellent collaborative work that we do with many of you represented in the room. So we want to catalyze those synergies among Cornell researchers and partners. So during today, you're going to hear from multiple project teams, often in what we call our Innovation for Impact Fund, and see that behind every one of the successes that we're going to be touting today is a web of relationships, collaborations, and partnerships, to all of which Cornell Atkinson has added considerable value. Couldn't have remotely done it alone, but we've added value to accomplish what we share as goals, and all of it's supported by philanthropy. So as you listen today to many examples, ponder that it all depends, for us at Cornell, on the deep and wide bench of intellectual expertise that's represented on the left-hand end of the diagram. All the faculty and infrastructure that the university has built over generations, largely with support from the federal government. That's that Cornell ecosystem on which we depend, and consider how we might adapt to the emerging apparent diminution of that federal science landscape. I'll say a bit more about that at the end of today, after we have spent most of the day reveling in success. And in the next session, we're going to be talking about, at a little more depth, the importance of those partnerships that I have talked so much about already. Thank you.
And David is staying on stage for a reason, because we're fortunate enough to now engage in a discussion between David and the president of the Environmental Defense Fund, Fred Krupp. EDF is a long-term partner of Cornell Atkinson, and they have advanced a number of projects together over the years. The title of this discussion is The Value of Visionary Partnerships, Why Cornell Atkinson, and it will be moderated by my colleague Ann Thompson from NBC News. She's the Chief Environmental Affairs Correspondent and Cornell's Distinguished Visiting Journalist this year. So Fred and Ann, please come on up, and stage is yours.
Thank you. Please, Fred. Hi. It's good to see you again. How are you? Well, it's so nice to be up here with both of you. And one of the things I have been so impressed with is I have spent this week at Cornell, and I will be very honest with you, I am new to Cornell. I had been up here in February to do a story on the bird flu. And so this is my second time here. And in meeting with both faculty and with students, I've been very impressed by the collaborative nature that I think is the hallmark of academic research here at Cornell, at least from what I have seen. And the sort of, if you will, personification of that collaboration is the partnership that we see with EDF and Cornell Atkinson. So there are lots of partnerships in the sustainability space. What is it that makes this partnership unique?
Well, I'm happy to start. I think I've thought about this a lot because it is unique and it's been incredibly productive. And I think there's three things. One is commitment. Commitment from both the Atkinson Center and the Environmental Defense Fund. Two is there's a central core in both organizations that is dedicated to the partnership. And three is, as David mentioned earlier, funding. So just another sentence or two about each of those. The commitment comes from the fact that both the center and EDF have decided we want to be partners not just on a one-off basis, but on a variety of topics for a multi-year period. In fact, I would say from EDF's perspective, on an ongoing basis. The central core comes from the fact that Cornell has the Atkinson Center. And there's hundreds of great minds here. And there are hundreds of great minds at other universities too. Few with the breadth, as Dave mentioned, with the veterinary school and the ag school that Cornell has. But what the others lack is a central core that has that network cataloged, I would say in the old days, Rolodexed, and that reduces the transaction costs for us to find the right experts. And EDF has also a central core devoted to working with Atkinson. In the room with me, we have Britt Grossman, who serves on the board. I served on the board and was proud to for more than a decade. We have John Tausell, who is working, he lives here in Ithaca. He grew up on a dairy farm, and he's working to take the knowledge here at Cornell globally. And we also have, not in the room today, Doria, because she's sick, Doria Gordon, who's kind of our liaison to the Atkinson Center. And then funding, we have the funding, again, thanks to Pat and Dave, to seed projects that ultimately have raised, as you heard earlier, a lot more money from other philanthropists. So those things, those three things, the central core, the commitment, and the funding, they just don't exist. EDF works with a lot of universities, but those three characteristics don't exist at any other university we work with.
Dave, from your perspective, what makes this relationship unique?
Yeah, it's really the parallel statements from our side. I mean, Fred said commitment. I would say trust, and that those two things go together. We have common interests in the issues that we're working on, and we bring complementary expertise. And we've organized over time in a way that we have relationships at sort of every level of each organization. And that maintains that increasing the growth of knowledge in each organization about the other, but also maintains that trust, because we don't shy away from, if some problem comes up, we don't shy away from addressing it and just dealing with it, and we trust each other to get over it. We'll figure out the ways to work around the problems that we together face. And yeah, Fred mentioned John Towsell lives in Ithaca. Fred just thinks he works for EDF. So we do offer...
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. As Fred said, we are a sort of portal for EDF and for other organizations into a very complex university. That complexity means that we bring all the breadth and depth of expertise that comes with both an Ivy League university and a land-grant university, like the provost mentioned. But for an outside organization to figure out how to locate the expertise that's most relevant for the problem they work, the university is impenetrable without a sort of the concierge service that we offer. So Patrick Berry, who directs our senior strategic partnerships team, and his team and the rest of us, that's one of our roles that we see. We're going to make Cornell accessible and make us a workable partner that would otherwise be very difficult and bureaucratic and confusing to work with. Now, EDF is also a big organization. Mm-hmm. So the structures that EDF has set up to provide us essentially with the same entry into EDF, with Doria Gordon being sort of our most common, as Fred mentioned, our first point person, with Britt on the advisory council. So we've just built together a way of operating over time that has made us increasingly effective.
How does this collaboration benefit the rest of the world?
Well, Ann, you know from your work as the head environmental correspondent for NBC and famous that pictures, videos paint 1,000 words. I didn't bring any pictures, but let me try to paint one with words. I mentioned John earlier, John Towsell, who lives here in Ithaca, and the science at Cornell on dairy is unsurpassed at any other university anywhere in the world. Now, why does dairy matter? And well, on climate change, it turns out that methane is a very big deal. I didn't know this 15 years ago is when I first learned it. I'm embarrassed to admit it. But it turns out, how big a deal is it? We all know carbon dioxide is the real cause, right? The most important cause. Well, think about this. Over the next 10 years, when all the fossil fuels on the planet are burned, they emit a heck of a lot of carbon dioxide. And that's going to warm the planet for 100 years. And over that first 10 years, it's going to warm the planet significantly too. So there's the emissions from 2025 this year. It turns out that the anthropogenic emissions of methane, 2025, over the next 10 years, will warm the planet the same amount. Now, the CO2 is important because it lasts 100 years. It keeps warming. So this is not a reason to ignore CO2. We have to electrify everything and drive CO2 emissions down. But if we want to have an impact over the next 10 years, methane emissions are much more tractable. And we can do that at the same time we're working on CO2 and have an impact that we can see in our lifetime over the next decade. Okay, so that's why methane, but why cows? Well, it turns out cow burps are the largest source of agricultural methane. So when Britt first came to me, I think only 5 years ago, and said we need, we were already working on oil and gas methane, which is the biggest industrial source. We have a satellite looking at that now for the last year. She came to me and we were well along planning for the satellite. She said, we need to work on cows too. And I said, basically, sorry, Britt, get out of my office. This is crazy. How are we going to do anything about cows? But, over time, she had this idea, and our team had the idea. It's not just Britt. We now have a lot of people working on dairy methane and climate-smart agriculture. They had this idea that, well, hey, what if we partner with the biggest dairy companies in the world, like Danone? I guess in the United States we say Danone. They have 55,000 farms. Not cows, farms, many with 1,000 cows that supply them. And by taking the information here at Cornell and extending it throughout the world with the purchasing power of Danone, although they don't want to use a blunt instrument, they want to encourage and help their farmers, we actually can have an impact on the whole world. And is it puffery that Cornell has this unexcelled dairy science? No. Let me just give you one example. The researchers here, Joe Van Ambrach, have figured out the diet that is used for 70% of the cows in all of North America, US, Canada, and Mexico. Mike Van Ambrach, Joe McFadden has the first chambers in North America where you put cows in and you see what the effect of changing the diet and other interventions are. This is unique here at Cornell. So this partnership, we've hired a veterinarian full-time to add to our team in India to take this information to the biggest dairy producing country in the world. They produce 30% more milk than the United States, and they have 10 times as many cows. So the amount of efficiency, the amount of methane reductions that are possible there are enormous. We can change the temperatures we'll see in the next 10 years, thanks in significant part to this partnership.
Yeah. So the goal here would be to change the feed of the cows to reduce the methane that they emit when they burp.
Yes, that's one of the
Right.
things.
Yeah, it's that and much more, because the expertise that Fred mentioned that Cornell has ranges everything from the feed into the cows to how you manage the cows to what you do with the manure to how we produce the food on the farms where the cows reside. So Cornell has expertise in the whole system, and that's we've been working with EDF on every aspect of that. So thank you, Britt, for not getting out of Fred's office.
But I think the point that you make about when Britt came into your office and said, we got to do something about cows, when you started this collaboration, what was it, more than a decade ago, right? What were you tackling then? What did you think would be feasible then? And what have you learned since that has now changed direction, and where are you headed today?
Yeah, in many ways, there was a focus on climate then. There's a focus on climate now. The particular aspects that we have realized are as important, like Fred was emphasizing, new awareness of methane. There are things that are changing. We're working more on the interactions of climate change with human health and cardiovascular disease, of heat, the way that environment, especially an urban environment where most of the world's people live in the developed world, urban greening, just planting trees and the availability of green spaces have a remarkable effect on the health of people in those neighborhoods. So there's in some ways there's a lot of continuity in what we're working on, but the particular ways in which we're working on them have changed. If I could just add a little bit to what Fred said earlier, though, just to stick with methane as an example, though, you ask why does this partnership benefit the world? We get research into practice much more quickly than we would otherwise.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Cornell has a professor of practice. One of them, Alistair, is here. I saw him when he walked in. But I mean, that's what you're trying to do. It's not staying in a laboratory or in a classroom. You're putting it out into the real world.
No, exactly. And it's being willing to be influenced. So one of the reasons the partnership works so well is because there's a lot of great scientists within EDF as well. So there's respect for what we do. There's an understanding of what we do. But they bring organizations like Danone, corporations like Danone, which there might be a one-off partnership or collaboration for the life of a grant between a Cornell faculty member and Danone, or part of Danone, for a few years. But with the partnership with EDF can bring some stability and bring new corporate partners into that conversation and change the questions that university researchers are asking in ways that more quickly and directly provide information that's actionable.
What's on the drawing board at this partnership, in this collaboration now? What are you two working on together?
Well, David, we just announced a series of grants last week with these fundings, and there's a bunch of things. The one is wildfires. It turns out, wildfires, you could say they're a consequence of global warming, but now they're also a cause. In the case of Canada, all the wildfires a few years ago put so much carbon dioxide in the air, it was more than the whole country's industrial base and all the cars and trucks. And so if we can come up with science to minimize the likelihood that these warming temperatures and lightning strikes in the boreal forests are causing wildfires, that's a big contribution. And last week, we funded a project to do something similar in Brazil, because the tropics are the other big place of emissions. We just funded work on minimizing the emissions of methane from rice in India. So, that's on the drawing board. What else? There's a need to come up with new types of, I said earlier, we need to electrify everything. Well, some things are really hard. You need liquid fuels. And so e-fuels like ammonia and methanol, hydrogen are going to be necessary. We're working with Cornell to figure out which of those e-fuels really are a positive advance and which aren't. Because there's a lot of hype in this field. We can solve global warming with my widget and make me rich at the same time. Cornell can help us separate what are the real climate benefits from what are the purported. So those are just three things that we've just funded in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think going forward, we're also working together, and I expect may work together more in the future on these hard to decarbonize industries. How can we make cement without it being such a globally significant source of carbon? How can we make steel? How can we make fertilizer, which is very energy intensive? We're working together on that. We've worked on jet fuel, part of what Fred talked about. So I think that's, again, those illustrate the way that we are confident that because both organizations bring a breadth and depth, we will continue to be able to be flexible and work on the problems that are both significant and at the time, under changing circumstances, are still sort of ripe for solving with some inputs. So we see a future going forward working together.
And if I could add just one thing, because I know I'm old enough to have 3 grandchildren, and one of my favorite projects, which has had an impact in the real world, is work we did together with Cornell on the heavy metal content of baby food, cadmium, arsenic, lead. And a result of that joint work, the FDA passed standards to require, if you're a mother or a father and buying your baby food in a supermarket, there are now new, stricter standards on how contaminated that food can be. And it sounds like no one would put this stuff in baby food. Well, it's not intentional, but rice grown in the United States has a lot of arsenic. And so it just, and so do other things. So it just happens. And California, as a result of this work, passed legislation that companies have to test the baby food they're selling in stores and disclose what the content of these toxics are. So that's like a real impact that affects kids growing up and prevents their brains from being impacted, and I hate to say even damaged, by contaminated food.
Maybe we should have started with human food instead of cow food, but it's instructive because the pathways to actually achieving the impact were both in both of those cases through FDA. Mm-hmm. And we researchers alone and Cornell Atkinson alone could not have driven the knowledge that Cornell researchers produced into action without the partnership with EDF and their work in Washington, D.C.
It essentially gives you a fast track, if you will, to taking what you're learning and putting it into practice.
It gives us a fast track, but in this case, I was so happy, David, when you opened, you mentioned the new book, Abundance, by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, which is really worth reading. I'm not saying I agree or EDF agrees with everything in it, but it's really worth reading. And one of the things that we discovered working with Cornell is Bovier, a product made by DSM. It was going to take the FDA 7 years to approve this product. It can reduce methane emissions by, some say, 30 or 40%. The long-term testing still needs to be done, but it's very promising. But it's already been approved in many of the nations around the world, and we looked at the science and said, this is safe. And so, based on the work with Cornell, we went to the FDA, and instead of 7 years, we were able to get them to approve it within the last year, basically in 7 months. Wow. We need to cut some of the red tape that is preventing environmental progress, and we need to, I don't know, some might say brave, I don't know, we need to be honest enough to admit that some of the regulations get in the way of the results we need. Mm-hmm.
The provost mentioned that this has been a very challenging week for Cornell, very, very challenging times for Cornell and the country. So given these times that offer great consequences and also great opportunities, what do you see that is possible to achieve in the next couple of years from where you stand? David, can I start with you?
Sure. One, anyone who expresses any confidence about the future in these rapidly changing times is foolish. So don't take anything I say as any sort of prediction or even a confident forecast. What I would say is that I think the strength of our partnership will do well for us because we are flexible in what we work on. We are flexible how we work together, especially with EDF's partnership. We can bring, perhaps in the future, more partnerships, more corporate partnerships into the work that we're doing, whether it's on baby food or methane or urban greening, and have a bigger presence on these issues. I think what is going to be influential on government policy in the future, in the near future anyway, is difficult to see. Mm-hmm. But I am confident that we have a model of partnership that can stand the tests that are with us and that are coming, and that with partnerships like that with Fred and EDF, that we can together maybe build bigger partnerships. Mm-hmm. We had an instructive early case with Walmart that led because of a collaboration between us and And EDF, Walmart, came to Cornell and said, we want you to convene a study of soil carbon. And we contributed through that process to Walmart's success with their Gigaton project. So I think when we bring other actors into the conversation, make university research part, maybe not central all the time, but part of that conversation with partners that know how to push and pull levers that universities are never going to be able to, I'm confident looking forward.
Fred, what do you see as the opportunities and the possibilities?
I don't have a better answer than David. So I would just say, as David said earlier, the partnership has just gotten stronger and stronger. And on climate, as you know, Anne, from your reporting, we need speed and scale, as John Doerr wrote a book called Speed and Scale. We need bigger interventions, and we need them to take hold faster. And I truly believe collaborations with universities, NGOs, not just EDF, and universities, not just Cornell, but Cornell as a model with the Atkinson Center, and companies. When you get those stakeholders together, going back to your opening quote, it just makes it easier for the political system and society to see here's a well thought out, scientifically grounded solution that has support from a variety of interests, and that's the magic here.
So give us a call to action as we wrap up. What is it that we as individuals can take from your partnership and put to use in our own lives?
I would say if you're a researcher here at Cornell or an academic anywhere in the university and you're interested in doing your part to help the world, look for a partner, whether it's a company that can take your ideas to scale or an NGO. If you're in civil society, if you're an NGO, or working in a company, or citizen in a town, whatever role you have, see if you can work with researchers so that the ideas you're working on are grounded in science and are not just hype, because unfortunately there is a lot of that. And make sure that what you're doing is well grounded. And for all of us, I think there's a lesson here that, supporting and nurturing the Atkinson Center, creating them in other universities as well, but making sure this institution is strong. And I dare say that there's funding for NGOs beyond EDF, but including EDF and the Atkinson Center to co-invest in more of these projects. I really think there's magic here, Anne, and I think there's, when Dave first came to my office, he had been a funder of EDF. I'm grateful for that. He and Pat remain a funder of EDF, and told me about his idea and his vision. And I knew already he was a successful investor, which is based on having insights that are uncommon. His vision is persuasive, and I'm so happy to see it flowering.
Dave?
Well, before Fred's comments, I've never thought before of universities in this way. Universities are where hype comes to die. But I think
except on the sports field, but that's okay.
Yeah. You're betraying your Notre Dame origins.
Yes, this is true.
But I think I'll take that because we are the source of new knowledge and insights. Universities have always been that, and they can remain that way. And so one of the take-homes I would say to everyone is recognize the power of university research and what it has contributed to the U.S. economy and the global economy. And in each of your worlds, remind others of that as universities are under assault. Universities, though, I'll just echo what Fred said. Partnerships are the way forward. Whether it's Cornell, Atkinson, and EDF, we offer ourselves as examples If you're leaders of another organization, think of us or other universities. Think about how to create more of an ecosystem where we can innovate together across sectors and lead to a future that has more opportunities, not seems to be a future of constrained opportunities.
Yeah, as I'm listening to both of you and I think of my week at Cornell, what keeps going through my head is the old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together. And I think what you're doing here at Cornell Atkinson with EDF is a perfect example of that. And thank you both for your time explaining this well, and most of all, your commitment to nurturing and protecting our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Patrick Berry, the Bruce H. Bailey Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at Cornell Atkinson. Building on Fred and David's conversation about partnerships, I'd like to introduce our Innovation for Impact Fund. This is Atkinson's engine for creating meaningful sustainability collaborations with real-world impact. The IIF operates as a small, nimble foundation within Cornell, bringing together external partners, Cornell researchers, and Atkinson staff around key sustainability challenges. Since 2019, we've developed over 115 projects, each of those with non-academic partners such as NGOs, companies, policymakers, government agencies, and all with clear pathways to measurable real-world impact. Today, across 3 sessions throughout this day, you'll experience a variety of these collaborations at different stages, in different formats, and with very different styles of teams. Just down the road from this beautiful new building, there's this charming, or depending on your schedule, frustrating one-lane bridge. It's short, it's narrow, with surprisingly no formal rules about which side can cross when. And if you want to have fun at Ithaca dinner party, ask how many cars should go before the next should go. This bridge mirrors how most university to external world connections operate. Relatively limited pathways with hazy norms or practices to push knowledge and innovation, primarily outward to specific target partners like local communities, industry, or government. At Cornell Atkinson, we're not content to simply be traffic controllers waving the traffic through more efficiently across an outdated one-lane bridge. We're trying to reimagine what that connection can be. We engineer custom pathways that link Cornell expertise directly with very non-traditional partners for the university who might not otherwise interact or want to interact with the university. Rather than expanding existing routes, we look to build entirely new connections where they're needed most, creating value for both sides of every bridge that we construct. We create pathways that connect Cornell researchers directly with outside organizations around our key challenges that David shared earlier. Unlike that simple one-lane bridge, our connections simultaneously work in multiple directions. That means that we expect and count on these connections to influence and shift the work and thinking of our Cornell partners, our researchers here on campus, just as much as we hope they influence the outside world. We're able to build these connections quickly, these bridges quickly, when urgent sustainability issues or opportunities arise, and we're able to extend these connections much farther than faculty could reach on their own, creating a web of collaboration instead of isolated links. This approach transforms Cornell from an institution with limited access points to one of a dynamic network of pathways to real-world impact, each one custom designed for specific challenges and partners. The result? A growing ecosystem of non-traditional collaborators who increasingly see Cornell as their most responsive, helpful, and impactful ally on their work. Opening our showcase today, the first of 3, is our collaboration with the Clean Air Task Force. Casper Spokas is the director of the electricity program, and he will introduce Clean Air Task Force work with Cornell Atkinson. He'll then be followed by his colleague Ann Garth, Senior Geothermal Associate, and Cornell Professor Seth Saltiel, who will discuss their joint exploration of deep geothermal energy, or, as Clean Air Task Force likes to call it, super hot rocks. Kasparis.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm delighted to be here to be celebrating 15 years of Cornell Atkinson. For those of you who might not know us, Clean Air Task Force is a global NGO that works to generate analysis, thought leadership, and also does direct advocacy in policymaker offices in US federal, US state, and European EU and member state countries. We also have a team in sub-Saharan Africa that works with local partners on energy access and building up local utilities, transmission systems, and so on. We are a philanthropically funded organization, which allows us to be very ambitious, but I like to think that our roots are very much grounded in the practical fundamentals of engineering, economics, policy, legal, and the political economy. And so generally that has led us to work to find new ways to deploy existing solutions that are commercially available today, but also to work on commercializing new solutions that could make the transition cheaper or could also deal with some of the speed and scale issues that have been mentioned. And so that is why I think we very much value partnerships with universities like Cornell. This helps us with some of the fundamentals that then rise up to eventually lead to policy recommendations and policy change. Before I get into some of the projects that Cornell and Clean Air Task Force have together, I'd like to share just two quick personal anecdotes about how policy and academics have come together in two little experiences in my life. When I was a young graduate student, John Holdren, then director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and science advisor to President Obama, came to the university for an event. And a lucky group of us graduate students got to have dinner with him. I cannot emphasize enough how much that dinner influenced how we thought about our research work and how it influenced how we went about our careers afterwards. It was as if we were hearing directly from the president about the most pressing challenges that the White House was facing at the time, and really led us to gear our research to be much more applied to enact policy change. In another example, a little bit later in my graduate school career, I was lucky to be in a meeting at another university with some researchers and some NGOs who were discussing some of the key challenges at the time. And I remember a professor kind of exacerbatedly rolling their eyes when a certain challenge was being described, noting that, hey, I've already published on this a couple of years ago. The NGO representative very politely said, well, there's probably one of two problems. Either one, nobody read your paper, or two, if they did, they probably didn't understand what you were saying. You know the phrase, your work will speak for itself? I don't think that's quite applicable to transforming fundamental academic research into policy change. And so I think that goes to show you the potential win-win partnerships that we have. NGOs can bring policy context and policy challenges that hopefully inspire academics to gear their research towards policy change. And then we can go and take the really good, fundamental, innovative, cutting-edge research and promote that to policymakers that we have relationships with. And so generally, I'd say, Cornell is really set up, given their expertise in engineering, energy, and agriculture, to have a substantial policy impact in the world. But I really do think it's organizations like Atkinson and this fund that make these collaborations possible. And without them, I don't think a lot of these collaborations would have occurred. Cornell Atkinson and Patrick's team has been fundamental in Clean Air Task Force finding the right researchers, that work on the topics that we are interested in working on the policy context. They have very much streamlined the process in terms of creating those collaborations. They have funded work that is very applied that traditional sources of funding for academics might not have been interested in. And going forward, we're going to work together to continue to enhance the overall impact of the research work of the academics here. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about some of the partnerships that we have going on, but I'll just very, very briefly name a few. So our Super Hot Rock Geothermal program, which you'll hear about, is working with Professor Seth Saltiel to lay out some of the gaps that exist for producing clean electrons with geothermal power, which has ended up informing already federal funding allocations and other work in the field. Our carbon management program is working with Fengshui Yu to evaluate carbon dioxide removal pathways and how to commercialize more technology options and maximizing the impact of taxpayer money. And our electricity program and our state team is working with Lindsay Anderson on addressing critical infrastructure analysis and planning gaps here in this very state to allow the state to make better decision making and achieve a lower cost decarbonized power system. Looking forward, Clean Air Task Force is going to get even more involved with Cornell, hopefully. We're working on 5 proposals that will be submitted to the multi-NGO dairy sustainability RFP with EDF and TNC. So I just want to thank the center very much, Patrick, Sean, everyone else we've been working with, because these partnerships really help advance the research to real-world action and accelerate climate solutions. I've seen it firsthand. So thank you very much for being here, and I'd like to call on Anne and Seth to join us on stage.
Just gonna podium where you'd like to be. Great. I guess I'll stay with you.
Hi everyone, so nice to be with you today. My name's Anne. I work on CATF's Super Hot Rock Geothermal team. It is the coolest name you could possibly imagine. And I'm very excited today to introduce you to Super Hot Rock Geothermal, which is an emerging form of high temperature geothermal energy with an enormous potential. CATF's modeling has estimated that just 1% of the global super hot rock energy endowment could produce 63 terawatts of clean, firm energy, which is 8 times more than all of the electricity currently used in the world right now. Other modeling we've done has estimated that at commercial scale, super hot rock geothermal could produce power at costs that are competitive with fossil fuels. So you put those 2 things together, and that's a pretty exciting value proposition. When we're thinking about topics or technology areas that we work on at CATF, there are 3 factors we look for. 1 is importance. Does this matter? 2 is tractability. Can progress be made in this area? And 3 is neglectedness. Is there a unique role that CATF can play in helping drive this forward? And super hot geothermal definitely fits all 3. What I'm going to talk about now is the second one, tractability. I think the obvious question that some of you may be asking yourselves is, well, if super hot geothermal is so great, then why haven't I heard of it? Why hasn't it taken the world by storm? And the answer is that there are innovations that are still needed in order to realize this incredible potential. So the way geothermal power generation works, as you can see in this little animation, you basically pump water down a well. At the bottom of the well, the water travels through little pathways in the rock. The rock is really hot. The water gets really hot. It picks up all of that heat. It then makes its way through a second well up to the surface. And at the surface, you can take that very hot water and use it to produce electricity. And you can use this basic methodology to produce geothermal power at lots of different temperatures. Super hot rock, as the name suggests, is the highest temperature form of this power. It's the most energy dense, which is what allows for the transformative potential. But also, at very, very hot temperatures, 400 Celsius and above, things start to melt, things start to break, Things don't work the way they do at lower temperatures. And so you have this paired challenge of this incredible potential and technological challenges that need to be overcome. So 2 or 3 years ago, CATF decided to produce a series of reports that would lay out the technological hurdles that need to be overcome. How do we make superhot rock happen? So there's a report about drilling the wells. There's a report about actually constructing the wells. There's a report about getting that heat energy out of the rock and into the water. There's a report about building your surface power plant. And last but certainly not least, there's a report about siting, which is where do you put this project in the first place? And that's where Cornell Atkinson comes in. Cornell has an incredibly deep geothermal expertise, no pun intended, as well as this really global and international focus. And so when Kasparis offered to connect us with the Cornell Atkinson team, my team, the Superhot Rock team, we were so excited we jumped at the chance to partner. Cornell Atkinson helped us scope out the siting report. They found us Seth, who is the perfect faculty lead for this project, and they financially supported the project. So altogether, it was a really remarkable partnership, and we're so excited by the impact that we've had.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our report and some of the specific technical details technical obstacles that we addressed. And I want to thank Clean Air Task Force for this diagram. There's a lot of these type of diagrams in the geothermal world, but this is one of the best, and I'll highlight why that is. Basically, it's because it gives a little bit of context for the fact that there is a very complicated subsurface that we have to deal with here. So one thing, although it is still horizontally exaggerated, you can see how deep we have to go. And the surface footprint of a geothermal plant is much lower than solar, wind, other types of renewable energies, and that's because we have all this infrastructure that's underground. And because the underground is much more uncertain, we have to deal with the uncertainty of when you put this well and what are you actually going to encounter. And so our report focused on understanding what are the current technologies and obstacles to better inform what happens when you go into the underground. And even when you drill a well, you still have kind of a point measurement. How do you extrapolate that information out from there? And so, it's less time than I realized. So the other part that Anne touched on is that when you get down to these hot temperatures, the materials that you're working with change quite dramatically. The superhot rock is sort of defined to be where the supercritical point of water is, where the water has both gas and liquid-like properties, which helps it get those high energy densities. But it also means that the properties at these conditions are really not that well understood, and they have opportunities for us to kind of engineer our systems to take advantage of those properties. But one of the points that have come out in all these reports is that there's really a lack of laboratory facilities to better understand how these properties change at those conditions. And those properties could also help us understand how we could find those depths remotely with geophysical techniques. And so actually I was going to go to this slide. So this map that she's showing, how deep would you have to go to get to these temperatures, is based on these sort of geophysical techniques. How do you analyze that data using techniques like machine learning? AI was mentioned. How do you better constrain what the depth to these temperatures would be? And then while I'm on this slide, so that was the report that we completed. And now we're moving into a phase 2 that we've started that will highlight specific locations, case studies of locations in which these projects have happened in the past and where new demonstration projects are starting. This is a very exciting time because there's actual money being put into showing that this could be done in places like New Zealand, Iceland, in the Pacific Northwest here. And so we're going to try to help inform that, working with Clean Air Task Force on these case studies.
Thank you. So we wanted this research to have a real impact. We do not want these reports to go sit in somebody's digital equivalent of a shelf and just never be looked at again. So to make that happen, last October, we hosted a workshop called the Superhot Rock Summit, where we brought together leading experts to talk about the technological gaps that we identified across our reports and how do you start making progress towards overcoming those gaps. So we had a number of academics. You can see Seth there on one of our panels, but we mostly invited folks from industry because we wanted the findings from our research to actually make its way to the companies who are developing new products, innovating in the lab, doing projects in the field, so that they could start to actually overcome the gaps and kind of make progress in this way. And as part of that, we also invited to our workshop a program director with ARPA-E, which is the Department of Energy's Energy Innovation Funding Agency. And they were so inspired by the outcomes from the summit and the reports that DOE and the ARPA-E actually set up a $30 million program to fund research into the gaps that we identified as most important in our work. So from the initial creation of the reports all the way through $30 million worth of impact is something we're pretty excited by.
Great. And so maybe I'll start. So being involved in this report and these meetings, as well as meetings here on campus with the geothermal community that Cornell Atkinson has helped support, we've put together a team of an interdisciplinary team of experimentalists to try to address this gap in the laboratory equipment in terms of really being able to test these materials under these conditions. And so this is a group of a group of experimentalists in 4 different engineering departments that all have something to add to this question of what is the materials in the well, how are the rock behave, what is the geochemistry, and all. And so we're currently working on preliminary experiments and a proposal to respond to this opportunity. And so I'd like to step back a little bit. I don't usually talk about my personal experience, but in this case, I think it highlights some of the things that we've been talking about. I started in Cornell just over a year ago, so this report was sort of my introduction to Cornell, this project. And so working with Sean and Patrick and this team has really helped me understand how things work in Cornell and some of the advantages there. And I'd say, so I was working on a project related to some of these conditions, and I could have just gone on and kind of worked on basic science. Most of my work is related to societal goods, but they're focused in the lab, focused on the science. But by being involved in this project with CATF, what CATF has done to kind of put the focus together on these goals is kind of really helped us engage with industry connections and kind of reach goal impacts that we wouldn't have done if it was just us in the lab, basically. And so now we have this funding opportunity, and we have the goals, and let's see what we can accomplish in the next few years.
And I just want to close with a big thank you to the whole Cornell team, especially the whole Cornell Atkinson team. This project was the super hot team at CATF's first university partnership. You all have really set the bar high, and we've just been so thrilled at the work together, so thank you.
Team. For our next segment, I'm thrilled to introduce 2 leaders and 2 of my favorite people to collaborate with, whose emerging work together I think you'll see exemplifies our network of bridges approach. First is my former colleague from the Nature Conservancy, Chris Johnson. He's going to share his perspective on our evolving 10-year relationship that in particular has picked up a lot of momentum lately. And then Professor Amanda Rodewald from the Lab of Ornithology and also a faculty director here at Cornell Atkinson is going to highlight a tool that we developed with Walmart that's using bird data as a proxy for very scarce pollinator data and thinking about how we can use that now to support decision-making in different jurisdictions by companies, by NGOs, and that are thinking about what has happened at those landscapes, including with the Nature Conservancy. And together, I think they're going to demonstrate some of how these initial collaborations and projects that we do and trusted partnerships can really grow into expanding networks of impact. So, Chris, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Should I? No.
Hit it again.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm honored to be here, honored to be part of this 15-year celebration of Atkinson. Thanks to Patrick and Gail, thanks to all of the faculty and researchers with whom we've collaborated over the last 10 years. It's really enabled this partnership to thrive. So for any of you who are not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are the largest conservation organization in the world. Our mission is simple, but really profound and essential, I think. We are working to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. We started as a local land trust. We actually launched the land trust movement right here in New York State in the 1950s with a land acquisition a few hours east of here. But we've grown into a global organization. We have chapters in every state in the country. We work in more than 70 countries around the world. We have nearly 1,000 scientists on staff at the Nature Conservancy working on kind of the pressing conservation issues of the day. Globally, we have 3 priority strategies that really occupy our attention: tackling climate change, protecting the lands, waters, and oceans upon which the world's biodiversity depends, and also doing what we can to ensure that humanity provides food and water sustainably. So that last piece of work is kind of where I fit in and my team fits in. So I lead our work in agriculture in North America. We're working to partner with public and private partners to expand the adoption of improved management practices, regenerative practices on crops, on grazing, dairy systems, expand the adoption of agroforestry. We want to see a different way of producing the food that we all depend upon to get different outcomes for water, different outcomes for climate, different outcomes for biodiversity. So, why are we so keen on our collaboration with Cornell and with other universities around the country and around the world? Well, first of all, we're science-based. I mentioned we have all these scientists on staff, and that is very much in our DNA. We were founded by ecologists more than 70 years ago. Everything that we do, all those priority areas upon which we focus, we are guided by the best available, most actionable science that we can find. And even with all of our own science capacity, we can't match the intellectual horsepower, the research horsepower of a university like Cornell. And Atkinson has been absolutely essential for us in identifying opportunities for collaboration, in matchmaking, in coordinating and convening, connecting our research needs with faculty and researchers who can really most easily address those. And I think actually the partnership is also valuable in the other direction as well, because as I mentioned, we have staff all over the place, our proverbial boots on the ground, who are really sort of at the leading edge of understanding what are the critical research needs that we need to address to solve the world's greatest challenges. So it's been a really robust partnership. Super quickly, just a smattering of things we've worked on over the last few years. A really interesting project to understand how better management of agricultural lands might reduce risk of loss, linking remotely sensed data with federal crop insurance data and identifying correlations between adoption of better management practices and reduced crop insurance payouts. Another project focused on adding data about the benefits of diversifying crop rotations to an online tool that we share with companies and other decision makers to improve agricultural management. And another project looking at how nitrogen impacts water quality, and changing levels of nitrogen can be of value to people. We studied policies in the upper Midwest, my home state of Minnesota, and we actually found that a recent law that mandates stream buffers, perennial vegetation along streams, has actually delivered noticeable improvements in water quality. And then finally, we have an exciting project similar to EDF working on dairy systems and understanding how additives can reduce the GHG emissions from manure. So that's just a smattering of things we've already worked on. Looking ahead, we just closed an RFP with Cornell Atkinson. We had 16 proposals from across the Nature Conservancy, not just from my own sort of program on agriculture, but from renewable energy, from freshwater, biodiversity. So that's really, really exciting. There's a ton of opportunity to fundraise together to build new projects across a whole range of domains. And Amanda's going to talk about one specific collaboration opportunity, leveraging Cornell's globally leading expertise in birds and in biodiversity to link that with this work I talked about in agricultural management. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Breathless. Okay.
Well, good to see everyone today, and it's really exciting to be able to be here today and to share with you some of the exciting work that we're going to be embarking on with the Nature Conservancy and other partners to use birds as indicators. So we know that birds can tell us an enormous amount about biodiversity, other species, and about environmental conditions that can affect us as well. And we're all probably very familiar with that phrase, right? A canary in the coal mine. So we've been working with the Cornell Lab and Cornell Atkinson for a few years now to try to figure out new ways we can leverage some of the Cornell Lab's unique and really world-class data assets. So the one I'm going to be focusing on today is eBird. So eBird is a global participatory science program. It's the way it's organized is that volunteers from around the world can submit their observations of birds through their smartphone to this global central data repository that we house at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So what we've done essentially is we've built this global network of biodiversity sensors, and each one of us is that sensor. So here you're looking at a heat map that shows where the density of eBird observations is greatest, where it's brightest. In the 20 years or so since eBird was launched, the growth has been phenomenal. We're still in this exponential phase, and we have already, we've amassed almost 2 billion observations that have been submitted by over 1 million eBirders. Now, the eBird data are open access, so anyone can download them and use them in decision-making or science. But at the Lab of Ornithology, we're also taking those assets and we produce a series of data products ourselves. And so we'll take eBird checklists, combine them with data on environmental factors, about eBird participants. We subject that to a variety of different data quality checks and procedures and some really exciting new analyses that we're able to innovate. And we produce what we call our eBird status and trends data products. And what these are is they're including estimates of relative abundance of thousands of bird species around the world at the finest spatial scale that's ever been produced, 3 square kilometers. So here you're looking for barn swallow, for different seasonal estimates across the year. And here you can see that it's not only that fine spatial resolution that's exciting, but we also are providing these estimates at weekly time intervals. So what you're seeing here with the barn swallow is how it's changing its distribution, the numbers of birds around the whole year. So doing this just was not possible, is not possible at this sort of scale, both the fine scale and the broad scale with any other program in the world. A couple of years ago, we also released a new product called eBird Trends that provides population change estimates for hundreds of species, especially across North America. So again, this is providing information at now landscape scales. Once again, the finest scale we've been able to produce. All right, so now you have a sense of some of the science and the bird half of the equation that we're working with. So the bee side of the project really is born from a longer-term collaboration between Cornell Atkinson and Walmart Foundation. And so there are a series of projects that have been ongoing. And as part of these discussions, Patrick Beery and his colleague Gail Phillips, who are also on the strategic partnership team, learned that Walmart, like many, are really concerned about pollinator declines, and they wanted to do something about it. But the challenge is that we don't actually have a lot of really good data on pollinators, especially bees, wild bees. So here you're looking, if you believe it or not, this is showing records of bees that have been submitted, whether it's museums or other programs, since 1700. The yellow and green are showing where you have fewer than 100 records submitted since 1700. So pretty slim pickings throughout much of the country. And it's not just an issue of data quantity, it's also data quality. Because if you look at all the records that have been submitted, almost none have any details about what survey method they used, or even how long they were out there trying to observe bees or collect them. And that's going to affect the usefulness of the data. And so we had these conversations continuing with Walmart Foundation, and they culminated, at the start, I guess, to launch this a project that we received $500,000 to develop an indicator of bee populations using eBird data. And so our idea was pretty simple. Sorry, a lot of these colors and some of the slides have changed a bit since submitted. So our idea was very simple, right? We thought, okay, birds and bees respond similarly to many of the same on-farm practices, habitat attributes, and landscape composition. And so we could use them in addition to remotely sensed data to really tell us more about what's actually happening on the ground. Now, even though, we thought, okay, this approach is straightforward, it seems like it'll be useful and meet the needs that we've heard from Walmart Foundation, we did not want to fall into the trap of if you build it, they will come. So to avoid that, Patrick and Gail organized a series of meetings with a variety of stakeholders and potential users of this tool. And so from those conversations, we were able to really understand, okay, what are the goals of these partners, their needs? What are the challenges and constraints they face? And how might we be able to better support their work? And so this sort of iterative co-development really proceeded along the whole span of the project. And so here you're looking at one of the outputs where we have on this map predictions about the number of wild bee species, which is a metric that is called richness. And so you can see some parts of the country, right, like in the Midwest, that light color shows where we don't expect many bee species, whereas other areas like the Appalachians or Ozarks, we expect many more. We were able to, sorry, some of this is missing, to actually chart changes in landscape condition over time by really rolling the clock back and starting with older data on land use and bird abundance in order to estimate how landscapes have changed. And so here you're seeing this combined map where we're looking both at bee richness and at the conditions that are changing. So for example, this shows high bee richness in blue, but deteriorating conditions, or high bee richness and improving conditions. And so the different uses our partners have been telling us are things like, okay, we can use this to identify priority areas for bee conservation, to prioritize actions, to track changes in landscape conditions, or to better target monitoring efforts, outreach, or engagement. And we provide that through this website that we've developed here at Cornell Atkinson. People can access the tool, play with it online, they can download the underlying data layers, and they can be connected to a wide range of different organizations and resources that support pollinator conservation. Now we're also using that information and really kind of tailoring it more specifically for other initiatives, like with the Nature Conservancy's Foodscapes program or Foods Cubed. And Foods Cubed is another sort of multi-organization partnership where they're trying to make supply chains visible for some of our country's most important commodity grains and livestock. And they're doing this in a spatially explicit way. And so what we're doing is we're then integrating our data products with their platform. And by doing this, they'll be able to better identify areas with high biodiversity value that might need better, closer attention or more interventions when it comes to, that supply chain. They can assess risks, maybe that certain activities in the supply chain may pose to different species, and can support decision-making in a wide variety of contexts. And one of those contexts is part of the Foodscapes program of the Nature Conservancy that really aims to improve the sustainability of supply chains through a variety of different mechanisms. So with that, I will pass it back to Chris, who can let us know a bit more of how that'll be used.
Well, I just briefly, I'd mentioned earlier that kind of one of our goals is to try to scale regenerative food systems, to try to have that become kind of business as usual in how we produce food. And so we launched a program a few years ago that we call our Foodscapes. And it's this idea that you can't only talk at a 30,000-foot level about policy and about markets and about supply and demand. You actually have to test things. You have to learn. You have to do things on the ground and make changes. But you can't only do things on the ground in local places without connecting that to market forces, supply chains, policies more broadly. So the Foodscapes are meant to be really large regional places around the world that capture some of the diversity of the world's food production systems, where we will test and we will apply and we will actually try to make a material difference on the ground to show what a regenerative food system can look like. One of these places that we've identified in the U.S. is in the upper Mississippi River Basin, part of the Corn Belt. And this is where we're going to really dive deep with the Cornell Atkinson team, with Amanda and her team, to try to understand how can this bird data, this pollinator data, and the tools that Cornell has built help inform agricultural land management and help drive better decision-making there. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So we actually have a couple minutes for questions from both teams. So if Ann and Seth want to come up as well. We don't have very much time, so it might be a lightning round, but do you guys want to come up on stage?
Sure.
And are there any questions in the room for the teams? Super hot rocks and birds and bees. You can't tell me that we're not bringing you good topics tonight. Fred.
On super hot rocks, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say super hot rocks. A question. How close are we to commercialization where it's economically viable? I mean, I know you can't know precisely. No one has a crystal ball. But is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What would you say?
This is my favorite question. So the first pilot project in the world is currently under construction with DOE funding in Oregon. So at that point, and the real answer is how much funding do we get, right, for more projects? And the faster we get that, the faster we'll reach commercialization. So it's more of a policy question. Obviously, there are still technological gaps that need to be overcome, but that's also a policy question. Do we get funding to overcome them? So, with the appropriate investments, we think that within the next couple of decades, we could see super hot, playing a much larger role in the energy system.
Great. One more question. Andreas. We need the microphone for the live stream.
So for super hot rocks, I saw on the image, and I don't remember the exact range that you guys had, but there were some incredibly deep ranges there. I think the deepest hole on the planet is about 12 kilometers. You were showing 15 kilometers up there. Where are you guys on the front of actually drilling that deep, and how's that coming along?
Yeah, so we have a drilling report if you want to learn more about it, but there is a ton of innovation happening in drilling with a number of different companies that are making moves.
Yep, I mean, I don't know. We could talk more about it for sure. There's a lot of new technologies about how to, but yeah, after this maybe we can. Yeah.
And one more question. Mary. Yes, you need a microphone.
Thank you. So my question is actually for the Foodscapes team, because what you're doing is so big and complicated and involves so many different actors. So we got a good glimpse of the kind of data that you're getting and how you're trying to translate it into usable tools. But then how do you take it on the road?
Yeah. Well, and again, I'd love to follow up on that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the science and the information and the data and the tools is part of it, but the bulk of the work is actually engaging market actors, General Mills, Cargill, others who are pulling commodities from the region, engaging commodity groups themselves, local farmer groups, local ag retailers, and agribusiness who are providing technical assistance to farmers. So there's really this sort of full supply chain process of leveraging interest in generating better outcomes from agricultural landscapes and then making that real in supply chains and in policies as well. So I could talk a lot more about that, but that's a short answer.
Yeah, and we can talk more. We're going to a coffee break next. We can talk more then. I'll say one thing I'm excited about for both of these teams and a lot of our projects is after these initial phases, and we have these non-traditional partnerships, we then have sort of non-traditional and other funders that are coming to us and saying, hey, we're really interested in that project. We want to follow up. And some of these sort of next steps and phases have been come with funders that have said, hey, could you do this tool for that, or could do this? And it's really exciting to see, so the next phases of this going outside of university funding and those other partner funding. And I mean, one thing I think about for this is about meeting partners where they are. So I know from our Atkinson perspective, I think one of the things that makes our approach effective is that we try to meet these organizations and our partners where they are, taking the time to really understand what are their organizations, what are their structures, what objectives do they have, what are their constraints. And it's something that I know for our team, and we'll talk more about this, is thinking about, like, it is our role to help our faculty adapt to those timelines, adapt to those projects, and think about how to deliver those different deliverables. And in early days, or our team spent a lot of time going out, trying to build partnerships, calling in favors, and trying to build trust. And now I feel really fulfilled in the sense that demand externally from NGOs and from companies and foundations is already sort of exceeding our capacity to fill it, of where we are right now. And I think you see it with some of the projects that we're doing. And I think it's a testament to this sort of responsive partnership model. So thank you all for being a part of it. And now I'm going to turn us over to a coffee break. Professor at Cornell's Vet School and a faculty director here at Cornell Atkinson, and Britt Grossman, Senior Vice President at the Environmental Defense Fund. Both Daryl and Britt have been instrumental champions within their organizations, advocating for a strategic focus on livestock methane and dairy sustainability. You heard earlier that Fred Krupp couldn't get Britt out of his office. And talking about this, there were similar dynamics in place at Cornell Atkinson with Daryl as he was coming in as faculty director, and we're grateful for it. What began as parallel priorities has really evolved into a powerful convergence of expertise and resources and emerging opportunities with new partners. Today, this collaboration encompasses nearly a dozen projects and about to grow quite a bit, and continues to attract diverse partners across sectors. Their conversation is going to highlight how initial connections have grown into an interconnected ecosystem of solutions-focused work, addressing one of the most pressing sustainability challenges. Take it away.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome, Britt.
Hi, Daryl. Happy to be here.
We're happy to make this really conversational also. There's microphones that will go around. We were noting how lithe and quick you were, Mark. Saying that, Sean was saying he is quick on his feet. So feel free to ask questions as we go throughout. We have a few props, a couple slides, and we're going to have a conversation which we hope you're part of. So Britt, why are you interested in ruminant systems and particularly cows?
Great question. So I'm an economist by trade and a pragmatic to a fault. And so when EDF really got involved in methane, which is such a potent and important greenhouse gas to manage for, we were talking a lot about oil and gas. And I was looking at the numbers, and I was like, what about this green slice of the pie? You know, we're going to have a satellite up there, and we're going to be able to see the emissions. It's not really good if we don't have an answer for what we should be doing about the emissions. So that's when I went into Fred's office, and he was like, yeah, but there's billions of cows. How are you even going to start that? So we got to working on a strategy. And what you can see here is that sort of globally, agriculture is the single biggest source for methane, slightly bigger than oil and gas. And is it not working? Oh, okay, sorry about that. Is this better? Also not working?
I just turned it on. It's on.
Hello? I'm sorry about that. Do I need to start again? No way. Okay, so I'll just go from here. Green, important, agriculture. That's single biggest source globally of global methane emissions, but very different in different parts of the world. So for instance, in India, it is 70 to 75% of all emissions. So if you go to the Indian government and say, we need you to tackle your methane emissions, they're going to say no until somebody figures out how to do it. Right? Very different to other countries where maybe the majority of emissions are oil and gas. So that's why I care, because we need to get these methane emissions under control.
Cool. Is my mic though working? Yeah, all right, we're on. to do this, as you noted, we have different challenges and thus different solutions globally. And we want to do this with partners. And we've had mention of a few of these partnerships in different ways today. But Britt, describe your partnership with Cornell Atkinson a little bit.
Right. So Cornell Atkinson is one of our different partnerships. So as we've heard today already, science is really the bedrock of a lot of work in environmental pollution management. You need to know what you're controlling for, what the best options are to control it. But then once you have that knowledge, you'll also need to work with all the other actors. And at EDF, we always start with putting the farmer in the middle. Because nothing's going to happen if what you're asking farmers to do is going to be practically impossible or financially unfeasible. So we work with them, and then we work with government, which is often a very big leverage point, to look at regulation of financial mechanisms. And as Fred already alluded to, at EDF we work a lot in corporate partnerships. So right now we work with 8 companies that together about 230 billion of dairy products, including Starbucks, Danone, Nestle, big companies on this. But the last one, and this really should be circular like David had it, is these researchers. And what the real joy is of working with a group like Cornell Atkinson is that we can sort of say, well, in the real world, this is not going to change unless we find a financially feasible, technically feasible, and scientifically grounded good part. And Patrick can come back to us and say, well, I can get you connected with this veterinarian, I can connect you connected with these companies, I can connect you with this piece. And so he can bring the package rather than us having to go with all the different parts of the faculties. But obviously today we mainly want to talk about the cows.
Yeah. And it's not an entirely unique opportunity here at Cornell, but it does capitalize on some of our historic strengths. Many of you might not know that there's over 100,000 lactating dairy cows within about an hour drive of right here. So we have an opportunity to take both ideas from them, do academic things to them, work with other partners, do academic things to the ideas, not the farmers, and then take those solutions back out and try them with our partners. We have lots of farmer partners and farmer organization partners that we work with every day. That's what I did, for example, yesterday. So, ruminants. We'll talk a little bit about ruminants to set the stage here. Everybody, I'm going to call on some people to pick their favorite ruminants. All right. How about, why not? David, do you have a favorite ruminant? And it doesn't necessarily have to be up here. Buffalo. He probably, because I am a little picky about some things, he probably means the ones on the bottom, not the great American bison, which is in the middle. Sorry. And I usually go from here to, you know, buffalo have wings? No. Chicken have wings, we put buffalo sauce on them. Right? That's my thing there. Cool. So the great American bison. Let's go. Alex, what's your favorite ruminant? The kudu. Nice. Nice. Alex is a wildlife guy. I've used this slide before. Always the wildlife people have to pick the most obscure animal that no one's ever heard of before, just to show off. Okay? We'll go for one more. Pablo. Water buffalo, nice. And I've got to work with water buffalo in South Asia and Southeast Asia quite a lot, and that's been a treat. So, the rumen. Patrick, that's your cue. We've brought a plastinated rumen. This rumen was once alive, and now it's plastinated. Voila. All right. We'll pick it up here and show it. All right. So Patrick just labeled himself Vanna White. So on the left side of all of those animals, better, right? Face that way. Face that way. Okay. I'm in the back of the room, and obviously, so I'll be the butt of jokes. In this rumen is a whole ecosystem, a microbiota, if you will, of archaebacteria, some fungi, some protozoa, which allow all those animals to exist and exploit their particular niche on Earth. And mainly what they're doing is able to break down cellulose and lignin in other plants and eat things that simple-stomached animals can't eat. And when they do that, because this is an anaerobic chamber, there's no oxygen inside. So when those archaea are doing their digestive processes to create volatile fatty acids and other things that ruminants need to live by breaking down that cellulose, there's no oxygen there to hook to. So they have to hook it to a carbon, and that's where we get the CH4. All right? Some of that CH4 gets burped up, and then that's where most of it comes from. So in the media, they always talk about, cow farts. It's not. It's the burps, okay? We will talk about, I also brought some fresh manure this morning, also from our dairy across the street. Essentially the same process is going on back there as well, the same kind of bacteria in an anaerobic situation when we store that stuff.
Britt, you leaned away.
It's actually pretty heavy, and Patrick can only hold it for so long.
Everyone else.
Yeah. So there's a few salient points here to show out. In dairy systems, when we try to engineer these things to be most efficient, we also want to work on the crop side of things. So we have better crops that are more nutritious for these ruminants and particularly more digestible. The more digestible they are, the less methane that gets made. We also take that stuff, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, we put it into very precise models to make excellent diets. So a modern lactating cow is doing about the human equivalent of a metabolic marathon every day. So they have to eat a very well put together, high athletic diet to get it done. Then, I don't know if all of you read the children's book, Everybody Poops, right? Ruminants poop too. And this is really excellent when we put it into a regenerative biocircular way that's full of nutrients, which we want to manage. This is nature's best fertilizer because it also adds back organic matter to the soil as well as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium to help crops grow, and we can capture the energy that's in this as well. And the really neat thing about methane is that it's naturally oxidized on a 10 to 12 year cycle. So if we don't add more methane to it, the global warming potential stays about steady. But when we work on it and pull some methane out of the system, because of the natural oxidation cycle, we're going to end up with less methane in the atmosphere overall. And even though some of our physics colleagues they get growly face at me with this, it is almost like creating a little bit of a cooling effect, which is important because when we put up one molecule of CO2 into the air, of which there's a lot of it up there, the natural processes keep it up there for about 1,000 years. It's really hard to deal with. Really hard to deal with. Methane, we've got a 10-year cycle, so when we pull some down, we can actually make an impact very quickly, like in our lifetime, sort of quickly, sort of stuff. So as I was mentioning, we really do want to work on the crop and forage side of this as well. And here are corn silage piles out at the Cornell University Research Center. And I mentioned to you this fancy diet program called the Cornell Net Carbohydrate and Protein System, CNCPS. It's used as the engine of the diet formulation in about 65 to 70% of the cows in North America. So really highly sophisticated. We balance a cow's daily diet down to grams of amino acids per day, right? So how many of you know how many grams of a particular amino acid you're going to eat today, right? We know that on sophisticated modern dairy systems. And Britt was holding up here a little bit of a total mixed ration. And this is what we put together. And this is you can pass it around. We put all the nutrients in this pack. It's like a shake that you put in a blender, and if you're an athlete, you're going to drink that. It's got all the nutrients that a cow needs to perform at a high level and stay healthy and productive in every single bite. So we have this one here as well. And it's not the same all over the world. We're also working in places like India, and that second slide that Britt showed, where the methane contribution there is really, really high. There, we're just even trying to get the feed analysis right? The chemical compositions of those feeds so that we can put together a better diet. And we've worked in partnership with people like EDF on that.
Yeah, so basically a lot of what we've discussed so far, like the athlete diet, etc., is for those cows who are lucky enough to live in either California or the Netherlands and who are really well taken care of, New York, obviously, and they have this fantastic diet available to them. But the majority of cows around the world actually do not have that. And if you go to India, a lot of times the limiting factor for increasing productivity of milk is the diet of these cows and health. So we also work on health issues. And this is one of the things EDF came to Cornell about, like what can we do to start expanding that knowledge beyond the world? And I'm looking at Joe McFadden, who we work with and who is working with, I would say gazillions, but many, many cows in India right now. But back to you.
Yeah. Nice segue to Joe and some of his work, right? We've partnered with a number of people, EDF again. We have a unique resource, which Joe is in charge of, these metabolic chambers. And in addition to building sophisticated diets, we want to test different things that we add to the diet. Some people at dinner asked me last night or the day before about feeding seaweed. And you asked me about feeding seaweed on Monday, right? Other things like 3-NOP. And we want to be able to put those in the diet and then measure all the inputs and all of the outputs to see that the cow continues to be efficient while producing less methane. And we can do that in these chambers, which is a unique resource that we have here with our partners at Cornell.
And I would say, like David was saying this morning, we need to be really cognizant of trade-offs. So one of the reasons these chambers are really important is we can measure, okay, you feed this cow something else, so okay, CH4 goes down, but is something else happening? Is productivity going down, in which case no farmer is ever going to use it? Or is it actually creating or keeping toxins somewhere in the milk or in the meat? So really important that you have these chambers so that you can really test for different feed and circumstances. I believe, Joe, you can regulate the temperature in there as well. And we know cows are very sensitive to heat changes. So that's another thing, you know, like how do you have these combinations of things and how do we ensure that we're not advocating as an organization for false solutions, because that would make Fred very angry.
Yeah, as Britt was alluding to, over the last 50 years, through methodical changes in reproductive performance and health and diet and genetics, a quanta, a pound, if you will, of fat and protein corrected milk, the footprint of that has gone down by 50% over the last 50 years. And we're now in a position to accelerate that and try some of these things. And when we try them and test them, they also need to have a regulatory pathway for approval. And Joe was like, oh, the regulatory pathway. But it's really important because the FDA does look after the safety of the products, the safety in cows, as well as the safety of the people. So we partnered, again, with EDF on this to work through finding a streamlined pathway for approval. Do you want to have any comments on that?
Yeah, well, that one is really interesting because one of the things we looked at, so when Fred was like, oh, I'm not sure about this, we looked at a strategy, and our initial strategy was built around 3 simple ideas. There is an ambition gap. NGOs like EDF, governments, researchers are not doing enough of this because they think it's an insurmountable problem. So how do we close that ambition gap? How do we show the possible? There is an implementation gap. That's things like feed cows better diet, have better health, things that are not rocket science and that will bring methane down globally dramatically. And the third one is this innovation piece, close the innovation piece. Why is there only one pharmaceutical additive, 3-NOP, Bouvra, that is being touted right now, and I can buy 20 brands of vitamin C at the vitamin shop. Why do we not have more? So we were thinking about, why is there not more money going in? Where's the venture capital? Where is it? And one of the things we discovered was this gap of bringing products to market. If you're an investor and you see that it'll take 15 years between development of a product and it coming to market, you might be a little hesitant. There's a very big gap, a very deep valley of death in funding before you can bring it to market. So we came to you not to cut corners, because we want the science to be solid, we want people and animals to be safe, but as a European to say, look, it's been, approved in Europe for years now. What's going on? Why is it going to take another 7-8 years in the US? And so we brought together consumer groups because we wanted their buy-in that we weren't cutting corners, companies and researchers to look at, and FDA was around the table as well at the same time, to together agree on an approach. And then we together, we basically fast-tracked this product in less than 14 months or something, which is unheard of. And it's one of our biggest successes, I think, so far.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was just sort of stuck in regulatory purgatory. It's really good. Okay.
I know it's your favorite topic. So.
Yeah, I can talk about manure for way more than the 2 minutes Patrick just gave me. That's why, all day yesterday I wallowed in it in my day job and brought you some today.
We won't pass it around.
Anybody want some? It's here. As I alluded to before, we have really excellent opportunities when we manage this part well also. So one thing that's shown here is, was alluded to as another partnership already, these mesocosms, where we can take the manure and try different ways of managing it, even different additives, to see that we don't harm the good parts of it and decrease some of the off-gassing, whether that be nitrogen or methane from that, and these mesocosms are there. And that has been an excellent partnership, and TNC, Chris, mentioned that already. There he is. Good, he was over here before. Yeah, an excellent partnership with external partners. We've got some of these employed out with our farmer partners out in the field, as well as our internal academic partners, some people in pro-dairy, which is another excellent resource we have here at Cornell.
I want to sort of add one thing. Again, David Lodge, your trade-off discussion this morning was so powerful to me because, as I said earlier today, we try to put farmers in the middle of everything we do. We try to think about why are they making the decisions they're making. And it's not because they are bad actors and want to be bad for the environment. When it comes to this beautiful manure, nutritionally rich as it is, when we started having as many cows as we have in singular locations, there was too much of it to really spread over the fields for that to be taken up productively. So what ended up happening is the manure would run off into waterways. And so the Clean Water Act was like, you're not doing that anymore, farmer. You're going to do something else with it. So farmers did what they were asked to. And they started digging big pits, lining them with plastic, putting the manure in that, and the idea of manure lagoons was created. Problem with these manure lagoons was the trade-off that people were not thinking about, that you have this manure, anaerobic digestion, a little bit of sunlight, and boom, CH4 jumps off it. So now we're saying to farmers, you're bad actors. You need to do something about that. When really they had already been listening to the environmentalists and tried to do what was thought of. So now we're trying to work with farmers, not against farmers, about, well, what can we do with the manure? What can we add to it? How can we capture the manure in digesters, etc.? The gas, which is a really important source. But again, it's really thinking about how do you use the science to work with the farmers to get a practical and financially sustainable solution, which is really what the partnership is about.
Yeah, and it's excellent partnerships. Another little project is that we partnered with some anaerobic digester companies, NYSERDA, and Energy Vision, and we're building a small-scale experimental anaerobic digester across the street at our teaching dairy with the promise that we understand how to more efficiently do co-digestion. So we're going to take food waste, and there's a lot of food waste, which is unfortunate, from the Cornell dining service and learn how to optimize capturing the energy through co-digestion right across the street. As another example of our partnerships. So here's a slide with a lot of our partners that we've got to work with, including those people here in the room today, and highlighted with this multi-partner RFP that we've had, and Patrick will not be happy that I refer to it again as the Nobel Prize seeking, right? This is like a peace prize. We're getting all of the NGOs, the big players in the ag space together at the same table.
And the faculty across different departments and that.
Well, that's where you're going to win the Nobel Prize, is when you get the faculty to agree and play nice together. It's not the NGOs that are, it's all of us that are having the challenge of getting together. And it's actually tiered funding. The more partners you get together and the more faculty you get together, you get more bacon for it. You get a bigger prize. So that's Patrick's little baby here in the dairy ag space. So pretty lucky that this is happening and there's a lot of representation in the room here. Patrick's standing up. That means I'm going to get yanked off the stage.
Thank you so much.
I do think we have time for questions, though.
We don't have time for questions.
We don't have time for questions.
But very, very nice try. The good thing is we will be going into lunch soon, and these two would love to keep talking about that, so grab them at a lunch table, and we'll keep going. The only point I want to make here is that trust breeds impact. And you're hearing a lot of pieces around how we're working with different partners, and there's a lot of stories with EDF and impactful stories. But I think a key piece around it is how the ways that we are working together have developed a relationship. We're able to really work with unusual flexibility and speed. And when problems arise, and they certainly do within our organizations or outside, we're able to talk, we're able to text, we're able to email and problem solve it rather than retreating to our institutional corners. And that means that we have a stronger platform to bring in others and think about what is this ecosystem of solutions. And there are people who wouldn't work with any one of us on our own, but with both of us together, we're a lot stronger. So thank you, and we'll move on to the private sector panel.
Andreas?
You can find Britt and I at lunch. We'll be the ones with the manure at our table.
Yeah. Patrick accurately indicated that lunch is coming up soon, but, you know, I mean, we may not be ready for lunch, having just handled manure. It's just manure. It's just manure. So we're going to pivot, this will be the last session before lunch, to have a discussion with private sector representatives. We know that the full potential of partners is best realized through meaningful collaboration with industry partners who provide insights into practical needs, expectations, and opportunities of their sectors. This time I get to introduce, amongst many distinguished guests, this person right here. Now, I mentioned earlier, so David and I have become friends over recent years, just me on the advisory board, him as executive director. But Kim and I have been friends for 40 years because we lived in Donlin Hall, one of the dorms there in North Campus. Hey, hi. Glad you're here. Kim Wagner is a fellow trustee. She is founder and managing partner of TBGD Partners, and she'll be moderating today. Tony Bedard is the chief executive officer of Frontier Co-op. Andreas Mustad is the co-founder and managing partner of Nexwell, and Eve Saltman is the senior vice president, corporate and business development, and chief legal officer and secretary for GoPro. Take it away, Kim.
Great, thank you, and thank you all. So what we want to do in this session is really talk about how corporate entities can partner with other entities, including universities and NGOs and governments. And so with that, I'm going to maybe open it up for each of you with the same question. And so if you could each, I'll just go down the line, so Tony, you're on the hot seat. What experience have you had leveraging partnerships with non-commercial entities like universities, NGOs, and governments to accomplish your sustainability and strategic goals?
Okay. Well, you know, I think the best example of that is projects that we just completed here this last fall. So we partnered with Cooperative Development Program, USAID, Frontier, to work with smallholder farmers in our supply chain and try to help facilitate their operations to better meet, you know, the growing needs of our products and organic products. Smallholder farmers are the backbone of the herb and spice industry. Our company, just to give you a little more background on it, we do herb, spices, essential oils naturally and organically. We make and market those around the world, and we've really taken the idea that doing good works makes sense for our business. So building sustainability and social responsibility into every part of our work leads to a better top line and a better bottom line. So these projects, the big projects that we completed, was about $5 million in 3 projects around the world. One of them in Guatemala at a co-op called Fedecavera, who has 33,000 cooperatives, farmers that bring cardamom, allspice, turmeric to the market. So we put in pasteurization, sterilization, food handling, safety into that group, and they were doing the beginning processing. This creates value-added work for them, brings better products to us. So this is all inside of the cooperative model. This acronym is SPICE, Safe Processing in Cooperative Enterprises. So it was really taking those cooperatives and trying to build on what they were doing. The second one we did was in Sri Lanka. Some of the greatest cinnamon in the world comes out of that small little island. You've got mace, you've got nutmeg, you've got black pepper. And so there it was safe food handling, and so it's training development in those areas from the farm to the processing plants. And it was hugely impactful in trying to create. We also had a regenerative aspect to create higher productivity in their farming, which you think that the trees are 70, 100 years old, that they just don't need to be nurtured, but they do. And so we worked on practices there to increase fertility. And then finally, a really neat one was in northern India, in the Nepal, Kumail region. And it was a cooperative. Actually never ended up being a cooperative. It's more of a collective because of the nature of cooperatives not being really, I'll touch on that maybe later. But cooperatives are not really something that's really trusted in that community. But we were able to do a collective model there, and we put a manufacturing plant in that helped process the tea it's a really neat project. It's about 500 growers, 90% women. We built a factory, and then we're actually having the factory move over to their ownership here over the course of the next year. So the collaboration between USAID, CDP, Frontier, and then of course the private sector, smallholder farmers is critical to being able to do a project of that scale and size.
Yeah, so ensuring your supply chain, you worked with all these partners to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been in business for over 50 years, and so especially in the world of organic and regenerative, if you're not on the front end of that, trying to build those collaborations and build that supply chain, your company can't grow.
Yeah, great. Eve, what about in GoPro?
Well, at GoPro, we make cameras, really tiny cameras, and they're really innovative, and we also make software editing tools, and we have an app. So we have the full ecosystem of high tech. But we believe that our role goes beyond simply creating innovative cameras. We're committed to using our technology to make a difference in the world, and partnerships, particularly with nonprofits. Some universities are at the heart of our commitment. They allow us to use our platform and our products and our reach to amplify, the causes that matter the most to us. One of the most impactful ways we do this is through GoPro for a Cause. This is a program we launched in 2015 that has since supported over 1,000 organizations worldwide. And through this initiative, we provide cameras, grants, employee volunteer hours, and exposure through our great social reach to help amplify the incredible work of various nonprofits that are tackling issues like environmental conservatism, education, and humanitarian efforts. To date, we've donated hundreds of cameras, maybe even thousands by now, and tens of thousands of dollars directly to organizations that are making a tangible difference on the ground. And for us, it's not just about the dollars and the cameras, it's about storytelling. And we're unique in our ability to capture the world in a way that no other brand can. And we offer a front row seat to some of the world's most inspiring stories. And through GoPro for a Cause, we can amplify the voices of those working to make the world a better place. I'll just talk briefly about a couple of different partnerships that we've had that have really had an incredible impact. One of our standout collaborations is with the Ocean Cleanup. Now, of course, our founder who created his product while surfing and helped the world understand what it feels like to be in the curl of a wave, is very committed to water conservation projects. And so the Ocean Cleanup, somehow we met these guys, they're really from the Netherlands, and they're a nonprofit organization dedicated to removing plastic from our oceans. And so in 2018, we provided them a whole bunch of cameras to capture their efforts to tackle the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And this collaboration has not only helped document the work being done, but raised significant global awareness about the scale of ocean pollution. And the video we created together has garnered millions of views across our social platforms, reaching an audience of over 66 million people globally. And since then, they have removed 2.6 million pounds of plastic, maybe even more by now, from the oceans and rivers. And they continue to make great strides toward their goal of eliminating plastic from our oceans altogether. One more project that I think is worth mentioning is our coral reef restoration project through Sea Trees, another incredible nonprofit that is really helping to replant coral and regenerate those ecosystems. And we captured the efforts of divers and environmentalists in Bali who are replanting coral. And the video helped raise awareness for this critical project. And our donation of cameras and gear enabled Sea Trees to document their work. And of course, our cameras go, to some great depth and they're waterproof. And this video, which was kind of difficult to quantify in terms of exact viewership, but we think across our platforms and across Sea Trees platforms, that it's also garnered millions of views and really helped people learn about reef restoration. And through these joint efforts with them, over 1 million sea trees have been planted. So, yeah.
You've basically showed us that a picture is worth 1,000 words.
I know. I wish we had the video here today to show everybody. But please go online and look for the Sea Trees video and the Ocean Cleanup. The Ocean Cleanup has done a ton of other videos since then. They are big users of our products, and we have a really, really close partnership with them.
Great. Andreas, tell us about Nextwell.
All right. So Nextwell was founded by myself and Pablo Polito, who's sitting over there. And we have a third partner who's sitting in Miami, actually running the shop today. But we're right at that scale when we're about to switch from going fast, so going it alone, and going far, doing it in partnership. So it's an important day for us to be here. And so Nextwell is all about accelerating climate change solutions. And thanks to Pablo, a couple of years ago, he came up with an important goal for us, which is to either displace, capture, store, destroy, remove 1 billion tons of CO2 before the end of the next decade. So 1 billion tons in the greater scheme of things is 0.1% of the excess pollution that's up in the atmosphere today. It's close to 1 trillion tons today. But the only way you move 1 billion tons of anything is by, I guess, doing it economically, right? So it essentially switches CO2 from being a waste product to being a commodity. Now, there's a lot of political pressure around the world, so people want to see something to be done about climate change. Now, in this country recently, we've maybe come up against some hurdles. So people who are otherwise incredibly smart at lots of things tend to oppose something that is, I think, beneficial to all, which is to reduce this climate change risk. but we're still getting lots of political support in other parts of the world. So our businesses are focused around either producing super, super clean, cheap power, and we need that super, super cheap, clean power to harvest essentially either CO2 from the atmosphere or directly from polluters. Somebody mentioned cement. So collaboration with non-for-profits, where does that come in? So for CO2 storage, for instance, we're permitting wells around the world where we're going to store CO2 permanently, where we capture it from polluters and put it underground. Getting a grassroots movement into a community to get people to understand the risk of what it means to have CO2 underneath their home. NIMBY for a wind farm, it's visually not that appealing. NIMBY for a, shall we say, solar farm, less easy to see most of the time, so a lot less NIMBY there, but still some NIMBY nowadays. NIMBY for a CO2 well, nobody wants billions of tons of CO2 under their home. Like, it's just an understood risk for most people. So there's a huge educational component. And we, going it alone, can't educate enough people fast enough to be able to get that CO2 underground fast enough. And honestly, I do a lecture around people not really understanding numbers very well, people not understanding time very well, and not understanding risk very well. And I do that usually with my investors to try and get them to kind of give us some, shall we say, latitude to be able to donate to non-for-profits like here. So 5% of our profits go to places like the Atkinson Center. And we are only able to do that because we need to convince them of three things. One, that the rate of change can actually really accelerate. And people, when you talk about exponential numbers, they fail the test for the most part. I'm not going to do that test in this room because you guys are above average intelligence, so I'll probably get a few of you will already know the answer. But around time, when you think about that, 1 million years ago, we discovered fire, our ancestors, and you were to stretch that out on a 1 kilometer road, it's only the last 30 centimeters where you can actually name people that we here collectively know, Julius Caesar, or call it a 5,000-year-old pharaoh. Beyond that, that's the last 30 centimeters of a full kilometer of people that we can name. That's how far back in time we can actually tangibly touch someone that we can see had impact. Before that, it's all nebulous. So we've existed for the last 30 centimeters, and our lifetime is the width of a hair. Okay? We don't have time to waste. This climate change pressure is huge, and it's accelerating, which is where the numbers come in, and it's largely misunderstood because most of us don't know how to assess risk. So when we think risk, we think, oh yeah, it's more than 10 years away. That's not important compared to how I put food on the table today. So there's a huge challenge in overcoming that short-term mentality of human beings' way of thinking and being able to stretch that to 50 years ahead, 100 years ahead, and actually see the real challenges we're passing on to the next generation and how little time we have to solve those. So this is where we figured the best way to do that is, number one, work day to day on collaboration and speed on trying to get the research and technology that's out there in the market to help us understand what the real challenges are, because our three things we can give, time, treasure, and talent, are limited, especially time. Right? And treasure, because we're still growing, and talent is also limited in our case. So, working with non-for-profits that are looking at a much broader swath of the tissue than we are, to be able to come back to us and help us focus our firepower in places that we need, that's where we really excel and build relationships with, I guess, non-for-profits like the Atkinson Center.
Great. That's wonderful, and I think I took from that math is my friend.
Yes, absolutely.
Although it hasn't historically been. I'm going to call an audible because of time, if that's okay with Patrick, and maybe actually jump to the last question, and feel free, each of them had another question prepared, and so feel free to add any of that into this question. But just because I know we stand between all of you and lunch, the question is, what single piece of advice would you offer to university researchers and leadership at the university who are seeking to deepen their effectiveness and sustainability initiatives through industry partnerships? So feel free to incorporate any other information in there, but what's the advice to Atkinson Center? Andreas?
I can give you an answer. So we, unfortunately, our investors, no matter how philanthropically inclined they are, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with family offices, or you're dealing with infrastructure funds, or you're dealing with insurance companies, At the end of the day, they want to see yield. Okay, research by definition means you got to try until you fail hundreds of times, and that is a cost center. It's not really a profit center. So our ability to use our funds for research is very, very limited. So given that you guys are doing the research and have access to much more research than we can ever imagine, but we have funds that we can channel to you, farm us, right? Put a minder in place, someone that actually follows companies like us and what we're up to try and figure out how you guys can better help us. Because the more you help us, the more we can give.
Great. Tony?
Yeah, I would just, and this isn't some great revelation, but the more that we can tie the work to actual impact on the business, this doing good works that I kind of coined for our company is really the idea that, it's got to have pertinent impact on our business. And if we're working with universities, we've got to see the kind of outcomes, right? That the math has to work. Because there's need everywhere. There's, whether you're working in sustainability, social responsibility, whatever, there's always something there. But in our case, we have a brand. I should plug our brand, right?
Yeah. Simply Organic.
There you go. Simply Organic. We're in the consumer packaged goods industry. It not only is it important, the work that we do in our supply chain to strengthen that over time and to have universities, and we have done work with the University of Iowa on studies to help us better adapt the co-op model around the world and really did a lot of good stuff there with the universities, but it has to then come back and manifest itself in dollars and cents. And we've been able to do that in our company. It not only has built our supply chain, but honestly, I'm in the natural food industry, and guess what? It's good for my brand, okay? So people want to do more than they want more than price, quality, service. They want to know where it comes and how it comes to market. And universities that have helped us and other NGOs and things have really helped us build that business capability into these farmers that honestly, there's 3,000 have a hectare of land that bring all your spices. It's one bag at a time out of 1 hectare of land, a family of 5 somewhere around the world that collectively does that. And so we need to figure out how to do that more efficiently for them, because it won't be like Iowa where you jump on the big John Deere and farm 3,000 acres.
And I would just follow on that. I mean, for us, not only do we want to help environmental groups amplify their message, and so we give money to content creators. We've done some partnerships with USC and NYU around content creation, but in our own supply chain, we are very mindful of being environmentally conscious. And so when universities create research around making packaging more sustainable, we've actually used that. We've gotten plastic out of our product packaging over the last 5 years. And that's because universities are doing research about how to make better sustainable packaging. And that, with paper products and all the other things that are, not plastic. And, materials science is incredibly important ultimately for packaging. And so I think understanding what real business problems are and connecting that research with real business problems and solving real business problems is the way that universities and industry can really partner together.
Great. Now, since I saved time somewhere else, I'm going to give the Atkinson folks an opportunity to ask any of these people any question they want about partnership. Anybody want to take me up on the offer? Everybody's afraid. They're very nice people. Go ahead. Joe, the man with the chamber.
Yeah. So, I spent the last several years talking to corporations, and I think that one of the biggest challenges I see is a lot of corporations have very similar goals, but at the same time, from my perspective, not a lot of them want to actually work together. So I guess my curiosity is how can we better align to get corporations sort of be on the same page, and what role sort of university researchers like myself could help facilitate this? Because like in my space, like in the additive space, there's probably a dozen companies focused on seaweed and bromoform. They all work very much independently. But if we sort of streamline and we all sort of solve the bromoform problem together, God, we would get to the endpoint so much faster.
That's a magical question there, especially with the size companies you're dealing with. That's it goes to the whole cooperative kind of approach to things. And I don't have a great answer for that, because I oftentimes have people in competitors, you know, in my business, right, biggest spice company in the world, who, you know, we haven't worked together. There's this sort of, you know, intellectual property kind of approach to these things which really aren't that intellectually challenging concepts here. So it's not like we can keep them so tight. But the business is a business, right? And people are not really interested in sharing that work. And it's sad. Now we have some groups, you know, the American Spice Trade Association is working on sustainability efforts. So you can get some of these industry groups to come together, but there has to be that sort of you know, NGO kind of corporate oversight. But, you know, we've never partnered with a competitor on projects. I'm not opposed to any of that, because honestly, they're selling it. You know, Ceylon cinnamon only comes from one island. Okay, we're only getting it from the same people. There's no sense in tripping over each other in projects, but it's not easy in the business world to sort of share like you might wish we could. So.
Andreas?
I mean, I've heard of ideas coming out of universities for years, and I think humans get in the way. It's in whether you're the researcher that's just come up with the greatest new thing. The problem is the first thought that comes through a lot of people's minds, because we tend to be selfish, is, oh, that's going to make me rich. And by making you rich, it's going to slow it down, right? So I think of 1959 when Volvo came up with a 3-point seatbelt, and they just said, this is too important for us to harvest for ourselves. Let's give this to the world, and they did. How much philanthropy would that drive towards Cornell if we have good inventions? I know you guys have come up with an additive for lithium-ion batteries that would prevent them from going up into flames. Imagine the families of people that have lost children to or relatives to electric car fires that would be delighted to donate to a university that came up with an additive if they just open sourced it and gave it away and stopped competitors from trying to get an angle. Just let everybody use it. I think that might be a way to solve your problem.
I have one more thing to add. I'd like to get some GoPro cameras right into those little chambers, and then we can tell the story of the chambers and the cows and how that all happens, and amplify that and get some more, you know, eyeballs on your project.
I actually think it should be like those people that put the GoPro cameras on their cats and dogs and then watch them walk around. Put it on the head of the cow. This is a day in the life of a cow. I'll actually, because product development is actually my area of expertise, I will tell you in other industries, it took groups coming together and agreeing where the pre-competitive boundary was. Because there's also an issue around regulation and around, are you collaborating inappropriately? Are you sharing the wrong information or whatever? But if the regulators plus the industry can come together and say, anything from this point back is pre-competitive, we work together, and from this point forward, we compete. And the pharmaceutical industry did that, and they decided the pre-competitive boundary was when you found a drug target receptor that impacted a disease. So basically all the basic science upstream of saying, okay, this is now our receptor, you could collaborate on, you could share data on, and that happened. Anything from the receptor forward was considered competitive, and that's when it was every company for themselves. Maybe there's a way to do that. What the last question?
Can I just piggyback on the point you just made? So I would love to get your thoughts on, so there are mechanisms through the federal agencies like NSF and Department of Energy. They come up with these consortium structures where it's a university industry consortium, and really the motive of those consortiums is to enable pre-competitive research, not for one company, but for the industry at large. So I would love to hear your thoughts on those kinds of structures that exist and more like that.
I think that's beyond my scale. We're still kind of the startup phase.
I think the challenge is that when it was economically important, these things exist. When it's, people don't understand how tenuous our food supply is. So nobody's thinking about how we have to get a whole bunch of, food-related, regenerative-related people together so that we can have food 20 years from now or 10 years from now. I think we're out of time. I'm getting the wrap up. I'm getting this from John, which means he's going to pick me up if I don't stop. So I thank the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy lunch.
I love your point. This is such a good.
Yeah, John. Hi, everyone. This is our last IIF session. We're getting close to the end of the day. So thank you for hanging with us. For our final IIF showcase session, we're featuring a collaboration that demonstrates another pathway through this bridge network. This one began within Cornell. This project emerged from a conversation between two faculty members from different colleges and areas of expertise, Vibha Kalra and Buzz Barstow, who are both interested in innovative battery circularity, and we're having a really fascinating conversation that we feel lucky that they brought us, Atkinson, into. Our team helped evolve these initial faculty ideas by working with them, of thinking through what's the pathway to impact, and helping find and integrate a corporate partner that you're going to meet into thinking about how can this turn into practical sustainability solutions. Professor Vibha Kalra is with the Engineering College and is a faculty director at Cornell Atkinson. Joseph Lee is a PhD student representing Professor Buzz Barstow, who's on sabbatical right now, in biological engineering in CALS. And Phil Bove is the director of business development at Sun King. And they're all going to share their work, how their work together is creating bridges that connect academic insights directly into real-world implementation on the very cool and very important idea around battery life cycles. Please.
Is this on? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Patrick, for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. So I hope many of you will agree that one of the biggest technological breakthroughs in the past decade and a half has been when this first mass-produced modern electric vehicle was launched by Nissan, the Nissan Leaf. Right? And since then, there's been no looking back, as you can see from this very exponential growth of the EVs. Now, when we look closely into these EVs, they're nothing but an engineering marvel, right? For example, in this particular image, now in this Tesla car, they put together 8,000 of these Panasonic cells into this massive battery pack, which enabled a driving range of 300 plus miles. Right? And alongside these engineering breakthroughs, there have been numerous scientific breakthroughs that have led to the rise of next generation batteries. And Cornell has played a leading role in many aspects of it. Right? For example, in a recent discovery in our lab, we stabilized this rare form of sulfur that could enable batteries that are 3 times lighter or could last 3 times longer. Now, in this whole rush of more power, more energy, more cycle life, the field has failed to address 3 big challenges that all have a direct human and environmental impact. Starting from supply chain risks, right? United States is in a particularly vulnerable position with over 90% of the battery raw materials coming from elsewhere, right? And the mining itself, the traditional mining itself, causes nothing but an environmental havoc, right? As you can see from some of these numbers, metal mining accounts for 44% of toxic chemical releases in the United States. And now this is all upstream. What happens at the downstream when you're at the end of life of these batteries? When you use up all these batteries, we are creating all this amount of battery waste, which is a lot of which is ending up in landfills, as you can see in those pictures. And this is causing air, water, and soil pollution. And it's not uncommon to see battery fires from these landfills. In fact, an EPA report talks about a single landfill in California that reported 120 fires in a period of 3 years from battery waste. All right, so the simple question is, can we not just recycle all that battery waste and create a domestic supply of critical materials and mitigate all these environmental challenges? But the answer is not that simple, right? Because battery recycling today itself is very carbon and energy intensive. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but these are numbers for just producing 1 kilogram of electrode material for these batteries through recycling. So our vision is to create a green closed-loop circular battery economy that creates a net positive impact on our climate, right? But battery scientists cannot do this alone, right? The complexity and the scale of this problem calls for true convergence of diverse fields and strategic partnerships. And that's where Cornell Atkinson, the model of the Cornell Atkinson, is an excellent platform for enabling exactly that. So as part of this IIF project, we have built a team with 3 diverse partners, as Patrick mentioned about. I bring in my expertise as a battery engineer or scientist from the Cornell's College of Engineering. We have Buzz Barstow, who is a professor in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. He's a synthetic biologist and he engineers microbes to extract minerals out of unconventional sources. And then we have a very valued external partner, Phil Bovey from SunKing, which is an electronics recycling company, and in fact, the company responsible for recycling all of Cornell's electronic waste. So, and the aim of our project is to build our very own green circular battery economy right here in upstate New York. So to tell you a little bit more about how we are going to accomplish that, let's start with a little introduction from each of the 3 partners, starting with Phil.
It was funny when they reached out to me and they said, hey, do you want us to just use this picture from the website, on SunKing? They're like, any other ones? I said, yeah, that's as good as it's gonna get. I don't know. Yeah. And then our marketing team says, yeah, we should get you a new picture. But at SunKing, we specialize. Are we gonna play a video? You don't even have to look at me. You don't even have to listen to me because the video is gonna go. You can get the gist from the video. But we specialize in secure and sustainable electronics recycling, handling everything from the collection to materials recovery. We've partnered with Cornell for nearly 20 years now, and we recover about 250,000 pounds of electronics annually. So I did some digging. We actually pulled out 110 double-stacked full tractor trailers over the last 10 years from Cornell. They've got an amazing team that does a great job. And that ranges from outdated computers to lab equipment to specialized devices. So once we bring it back, so you can see, once we bring it back, we first evaluate the electronics for reuse, because that's really the best environmentally friendly, most economical way to recycle electronics is through reuse. But if they can't be reused, we're going to sort, dismantle, and securely shred the devices. Now, lithium-ion batteries go through an even more intricate process where it's going to be shredded, usually underwater or like very super cold temperatures. And that shredding process creates an end product called black mass. So black mass, we'll just consider that as shredded batteries. We actually have a little sample here to pass around. Feel free to open it, but it's like squid ink. So if you touch it, you're gonna have gray fingers for the rest of the day. But it's harmless, pretty much. I wouldn't snort it, but it's virtually harmless. So the black mass is rich in lithium, cobalt, and nickel, but it also can contain up to 40 to 50% of other materials like graphite, aluminum, and copper. So recovering those metals from the black mass is extremely complex and costly. There's 2 ways. One is very energy intensive, a pyrometallurgical process. The other is a hydrometallurgical process. That's actually the first time I've ever pronounced both those words right in a row, so that's pretty cool. And it's extremely tough, very costly, right? So you've got either toxic chemicals or you're using a lot of energy. So something should be done with that, and that's where all these super smart people from Cornell come in, like Joseph Lee, who is a PhD student in Barstow's lab. So I'll let you.
Thank you, Phil. So hi, I'm Joseph. I'm a PhD student in Buzz Barstow's lab. And the work that we work on is synthetic biology for sustainability applications. So as you heard from Phil, we get this battery waste, but how can we turn them into useful materials that can be turned into new batteries? So the first step of this process is extracting those metals from the battery waste. And these elements such as copper, manganese, cobalt, nickel. And the approach that we've decided to take is through biomining. And biomining is a process where we utilize microbes that are specially designed to extract metals in a way that avoids traditional mining technologies, such as pyrometallurgy, hydrometallurgy, these processes that emit toxic waste or use harsh chemicals. On the other hand, biomining is an extremely low energy process that doesn't require any high heat or pressure inputs, and it's an extremely eco-friendly method. So those of us in the Barstow lab, we work on this microbe called Gluconobacter oxidans. So they produce a leaching solution that's able to extract metals from the black mass from Sun King. And what we found is that compared to chemical methods, we were able to get over a 3 times extraction of metals from the black mass compared to gluconic acid alone in an equivalent process. And you can see in this electron microscope picture here how the Gluconobacter oxidans interact with metal-containing ores, producing these mineral dissolution pits, which allows for those metals to enter solution, which then we pass on to the cholera lab to where they can refine them into new batteries. So this is an example of those leachates produced by the microbes that we use. And inside this file, we have those energy critical metals that have been extracted from the black mass. So I can pass this around too.
I can't snort that either?
No.
Okay.
There's no microbes in there, but yeah, I wouldn't drink it.
Thank you, Phil and Joe, for a wonderful introduction. So let me now tell you a little bit about what we do in my research group in the College of Engineering. So we are a battery lab, and we work on next generation batteries that are lighter, longer lasting, but more importantly, that use environmentally friendly, that use earth abundant environmentally friendly materials. And as part of that, we work on various aspects from material design to testing of batteries. So I have some props as well. We have all these batteries that we make in our lab, hundreds of them, to test them out, to test out new materials. We also do real-time monitoring of these batteries when they are operating, so we can really understand their functioning and make them better. And most importantly, we work on end-of-life management of these batteries, and that includes battery recycling. And in fact, in the context of this IIF, we have developed a method where we can directly regenerate spent batteries and recover up to 95% of their original performance without having to shred or dismantle them. So we could essentially be bypassing the black mass creation and purification process. And I want to shout out to my a very wonderful postdoc sitting in the audience here who has pioneered this process. So now with this wonderful team put together, what is our planned workflow? Of course, we start out with the Cornell electronic waste. We are proposing 2 loops here, right? So for the lightly damaged batteries, we propose this smaller blue loop where we plan to directly regenerate the batteries through the process in our lab. And we want to further replenish those batteries with the critical minerals extracted from Barstow's biomining process. Now, for severely damaged batteries, we want to go for the bigger closed loop where Sun King helps us get the black mass from these Cornell electronic waste that goes to the Barstow lab for the very wonderful biomining process, extract the minerals, and then it comes to our lab where we do further electro-refining to make them battery grade and ultimately put them in batteries. Now to truly close this loop, we need strong stakeholder participation and engagement, right? From battery recyclers, car manufacturers, repair firms, waste management firms. We need to partner with national labs, community organizations, associations, government organizations. The list just goes on, right? And with immense support from the Atkinson's partnership team, so thank you, Sean, and thank you, Patrick, and with support from Sun King, who are also the division director of the Recycled Materials Association, we already have a strong outreach ongoing. We are also in the process of launching Cornell as an affiliate site in an industry university consortium, so we can truly get the systems perspective on this problem. But that's not all, right? For a true societal and environmental impact, we need to think well beyond technology development, right? We need to partner with psychologists to understand the psychology and also intervene consumer behavior so we don't stack up all these old phones in a drawer somewhere and instead actually recycle them. We need to understand the impact of policy and collaborate with policymakers. And a great example of that is a lead-acid battery today, right? 99% of lead-acid batteries are recycled in the United States. And a big driver for that is the extended producer responsibility policy behind it. So the question is, how can we use policy as a way to improve end-of-life management of lithium-ion batteries? And we have, and of course, again, Atkinson is an absolutely, Cornell, like Kathy was saying and Mario was saying in the afternoon, that Cornell is unique in the sense that we have diverse expertise in all these different fields. And we have ongoing initiatives. We are already bringing together 15 plus faculty across 4 Cornell colleges and 20 plus external stakeholders to really make this happen. So let me end with 2 closing thoughts. Lithium-ion battery waste is forecasted to increase 80-fold from 250,000 to 20 million tons in 2040. We not only need to act now, we need to act fast. And we cannot do it alone, right? And this is a picture from one of David Lodge's article on breaking academic silos, which beautifully captures the mission of Cornell Atkinson. And thank you all. And again, shout out to Patrick and Sean for their support throughout this whole process.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if we'll have time for questions, but this team and all the others are going to be at the reception afterwards. So thank you all so much. For our last IIF session, we're going to share another origination pathway. This is one where there was a faculty relationship already with someone in the private sector. So Toby Alt had a relationship with Scott St. George at WTW. Oh, thank you for that. And here's this, which is a large insurance company. And it has since evolved, and we built an IIF project together and worked on what that would look like. But it has since evolved in some exciting new directions that Toby's going to talk about that sort of demonstrate the dynamic nature of these partnerships, of these relationships, and how we try to push each other and work back and forth. So Professor Toby Yaltz from the Cornell's College for Agriculture and Life Sciences. His work is internationally recognized on drought risks and climate change. And he's already working in this boundary region between academia and industry through the Emergent Climate Risk Lab collaboration with the insurance sector, thinking about how to bring crucial climate science into practical risk management applications. Toby, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all for sticking around to the end here. Make sure my clicker works. Right. So I am really excited to share the work that we've been doing to tackle what I think is probably a $1 trillion question. And it's this: how do we use data from the past with climate model simulations of the future to estimate global drought risk now? And as Patrick mentioned, we've been working on this with our industry partner, Scott St. George, who's the head of climate and weather research at WTW, formerly known as Willis Towers Watson. for a really thoughtful piece on why climate change is driving up insurance costs, I suggest you take a look at his recent article in Nature. WTW is a global brokerage and advisory company, and they specialize in insurance and reinsurance. Some of their partners and clients include folks in the renewable energy sector, as well as firms that specialize in offering crop insurance to farmers in low-income countries. So they care a lot about drought, not only because it helps their bottom line, but because these financial instruments have the potential to improve global food and energy security in a changing climate. Support from Atkinson has allowed us to build a two-way dialogue. Now, they have a long history of funding research and collaborating with academia and using science to help their partners become more resilient. Our partnership is unique in that we get insights into industry norms and needs and opportunities for climate science to have a real impact. They get feedback on their products and processes, as well as opportunities to work with students to think about the kinds of master's and even honors thesis projects that might be mutually beneficial to our students and to the broader questions that they're asking in their world. This afternoon, so I thought, to get things started and to explain a result that's important to the underlying research we're doing relatively quickly, we could play a game. Now, originally we were going to have you bet on this, but we're out of time, so we'll have to find a different way to fund my research. Sorry, Kaldikov. We'll keep working on it. What you're looking at are all time series of El Nino and La Nina variations, but 3 are from climate model simulations, and 1 is from the observation. So let's just see a show of hands. Who thinks the observed El Nino La Nina time series here is A, show of hands, B, C, and the correct answer, D. All right, well, you get another chance. You get another chance, all right? Get ready. This is where we're going to have you place some money on it, but we don't have time. So get ready. Ready? You're only going to have 10 seconds, but you've already seen it once. You can see it again. All right? Absorb it. Take it in. Okay, ready? You only got 10 seconds. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There it is. Okay. Harder, right? These are all state-of-the-art climate model simulations, and they look pretty good. And that gets us into part 1. Rock you like a mega drought. It's mostly about products. So as you just saw, they look pretty good. But we're going to take advantage of the fact that our ears can process certain pieces of information more quickly than our eyes. I'm going to play 2 recordings. Now, I've tuned them all. I've processed the data from the observations and the climate model simulations from Nino 3.4, the tropical Pacific, El Nino, La Nina region in exactly the same way, so that a perfect model simulation or the observations will play as a concert A sung by a synthetic choir. We're going to listen to 2 recordings. I want you to see if you can tell which one of those is the concert A, tuned perfectly to 440 hertz. We'll start with the first one. Ready? Okay. Those of you who have perfect pitch might be able to get this one more easily. Here's the second one. Ready? Even relative pitch will do for this exercise. All right, so what you just heard is that there are biases in the frequency and the amplitude of even the state-of-the-art climate model simulations. And when you look back at this, you can see where some of that bias comes from. Over here, there are a handful of models, and throughout this whole matrix of time series, there are models that have El Nino and La Nina cycles that are too frequent, too high amplitude, and even too regular compared to the observations. Why does this matter for drought? Drought happens all over the world every year. An El Nino event occurs, and there's also wet periods during La Nina and during El Nino. So the rapid cycling between El Nino and La Nina makes it impossible for longer events to unfold in these models. And so they simulate a frequency of prolonged events that is unrealistic compared to what we know about the observations. And that's relevant for a large number of sectors. So say you're a company that prices insurance for the shipping industry. You might need to know about the risk of multi-year drought because it affects flow on the Mississippi River and would restrict the number of vessels that can reach the port of St. Louis, the second largest inland port in the US. And if you only looked at climate change projections from these models that have this very high frequency interannual variability, you might believe that such events as multi-year droughts that could affect the Mississippi River were more uncommon than they probably are in reality. And that gets us into part 2, Rolling on the River, which is more about processes and practices. So we developed a method to correct this bias that you can think of as being analogous to auto-tune. So you remember that song from Cher in 1999, Believe? Do you believe in love? I can't sing it. It's used on auto-tune. It's using auto-tune to isolate Cher's voice, right? Modify the pitch and leave the rest of the recording alone. That's auto-tune in action. Our method is similar in the sense that we're isolating the El Nino or La Nina signals, correcting the frequency and the amplitude, and leaving the rest of the model simulation alone. And when we do this, we end up seeing a large increase in the risk of prolonged drought events. We're working on getting this published as soon as possible, and we've been, doing this project for almost a year now. And in the fall, Sean started nudging me to maybe think about writing an op-ed about what was already known. And so he connected me with some of the people in the broader Atkinson ecosystem, Jeff Tyson, Damian Sharp, both of whom work in media relations. And we got feedback on Scott St. George. And within a week of presenting the research findings at a large international conference, AGU, last fall, we had a paper, op-ed published, my first op-ed I'd ever written, hadn't thought of writing an op-ed before this, in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And it reached a fairly niche community of people who think about these kinds of risks. But it also did 3 other important things for the project. And one of them was that it gave Scott and his collaborators at WTW something to share with their clients and stakeholders and talk about some of the risks that we're thinking about in my research group and the broader group of collaborators that I work with. Number 2, it helped us grease the wheels of that working relationship between my research world, the Atkinson world, and the industry world. And 3, once this was published, got in touch with a bunch of colleagues who I hadn't really talked to in almost a decade, who are from graduate school or from my postdoc days, many of whom had recently transitioned out of academia, some of them even leaving tenured positions, into the insurance and reinsurance sectors. That was 2024. We had different concerns in project before we started to face Project 2025 and the realities of the year 2025. And on February 27th of this year, the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, started firing hundreds of scientists, many of whom were our own alumni. And this really hit close to home that evening when I saw this post by a former student. After nearly 2 weeks of overwhelming uncertainty, today it happened. I was fired from my dream job of working at NOAA. I'm so sorry to everyone else affected. My job was to strengthen NOAA's use of machine learning and AI for subseasonal to decadal weather and climate prediction. Later that same evening, one of these graduate school friends with whom I'd recently connected with, about half an hour later, texts me and he says, "Did you hear about," I'm going to call him Xander, I'm not using his real name. "Did you hear about Xander?" "Yes, I'm livid. He was one of the first undergrads I mentored." His friend writes back, "That's rough. If it makes you feel any better, we're going to interview him tomorrow," but he said over a dozen companies had already reached out. Well, that makes me feel better about Xander, but not about the NOAA workforce. Now, none of this should come as a surprise. None of this should be at all surprising because it's laid out explicitly in Project 2025. And they label NOAA as a center of climate alarmism. And in Chapter 21, page 676, they state explicitly that the preponderance of its climate change research should be disbanded. In other words, the truth about climate change is alarming, and the people working on it need to be disbanded. So using Project 2025 as a playbook. And I say let them have Project 2025. Because guess what? At Atkinson, we have Project 2030. And that gets us to part 3. We're not going to take it. Same evening, same friend. I don't think anyone in industry will stick their heads out right now, and nobody from government can. But if someone wrote an op-ed about critical infrastructure that NOAA and National Weather Service provide, but which cannot, and will never be replaced by industry, it would get a lot of traction. 1 minute later, I'm texting Sean. "Hey, Sean, do you think we could get the band back together for another op-ed?" Ready? Ready for his response? Yes, give it up for Sean. Ready to support. Woo! Now we're cooking. This is within the same minute. We engaged with the same network that we just started building a couple months earlier, reached out to Jeff and Damien. They were pitching leads. We had a draft written within a week of the firings on February 27th. And within 2.5 weeks, we had another op-ed published that this time included 6 Cornell faculty from our department, 5 of them early career scientists. And I have never been more proud to be a Cornellian than when the 5 of them signed off on this. These are internationally recognized climate scientists who do amazing work, and every single one of them was on board with the message that we need to protect this critical infrastructure. And that was the part that really landed with the insurance, reinsurance, and private sector, as well as farmers and anyone who thinks about these kinds of risks. Yes, there's a risk to human life and livelihood that NOAA and National Weather Service address directly. There are also dimensions to what they do that are analogous to our highway system or our river system back in the 19th century. It's critical infrastructure upon which industries are built and that we need to function to have an efficient and productive economy, in addition to the public safety and national defense dimensions to what they do. This one seems like it really hit its mark. The number of hits I got on LinkedIn just went through the roof that weekend. People were reaching out to Scott, who wasn't a co-author on this, and telling him that they thought it was a good article. There were comments, these are a few of my favorites. Killer article on Cornell today. You can tell you've been talking insurance with Toby. It's a great piece that should wake people up in industry to what can be lost. This was sent to one of the co-authors. So we have momentum right now. And this is really just the start. So what's next? What are we going to do? Because obviously the firings haven't stopped. The cuts and the threats of cuts haven't stopped. This is still going to be an uphill battle to defend the value of this infrastructure. We're planning more op-eds and continuing to do groundbreaking research. We are going to host a hackathon and workshop right here in this building next month for industry professionals to connect with students, postdocs, and faculty to tackle an even wider range of climate hazards, from hurricanes and heat waves to floods and wildfire risks. We've got an eCornell course that we're planning to get released this fall of 2025 that's really targeting folks in the private sector that want to have an impact. It's called Climate and Energy, that want to have an impact in this space even without federal leadership. We've proposed a new CALS MPS program that we're hoping will go live and bring in the first cohort in climate and atmospheric data science in the fall of 2026. And we're going to, of course, keep defending and advocating for our peers and our colleagues at NOAA and NWS, because what they do and the infrastructure that they have worked on and they continue to improve is more than just something that keeps us safe in our homes and on our highways and in the air. And it's more than tools that the insurance and reinsurance companies can use to improve global food security by pricing insurance policies. And it's more than something that helps promote national security or even the fact that it fuels 1/3 of US GDP. And it's more than the fact that it gives us $73 of economic growth for every $1 of US government investment. And more than all of that, what this critical infrastructure does is it gives us a superpower to see into the future. And without that, we are catapulting ourselves into a future with no safety net, into the dark, with no flashlight. And that's going to put stresses and challenges on all of our global systems, our financial systems, our agricultural systems, our energy systems, in ways that will weaken us, not just as a nation, but as a thriving global civilization. So the work, as I said, has really just begun. And I want to thank everyone here for supporting Atkinson. And of course, I want to thank Atkinson for supporting this work. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks, man. Thank you. Thank you, Toby. Thank you. One thing I hope that these presentations have demonstrated is the role of professional staff in the unique partnership model that Cornell Atkinson has. And I think about that in sort of 3 different things that we try to bring. First is serving as connectors. How can we link Cornell's deep and broad expertise two partners who might not otherwise think of working with the university, might not find it easy, might not find it attractive, and might not even know what to do with it. Second, we think about strategic expansion. So how do you turn single projects or ideas in a faculty mind or just thoughts, well, maybe we could work with a smart person at Cornell on this. How do you turn that into a real project and other deliverables that can have impact other than papers? And how do you turn single projects into portfolios? How do you drive those into second and third phases that don't rely on Atkinson funding or typical academia funding, but drive towards impact? And third, with how do we push for responsive agility within projects? While we do a lot of work, and I'm sure we drive a lot of faculty crazy in our particularly iterative proposal process of saying, well, what about these other deliverables? How do we do this? And thinking through theories of change, including thinking through timelines that probably seem crazy and unrealistic. But it allows us to then be flexible to seize other unexpected opportunities, like Toby shared, when the world throws different things at you, or when a lot of it is very positive. When we say, hey, there's an opportunity here to do something with our DC team or our partners team, or to pull other partners into work. And I think that kind of pre-work that we do on the proposal phase, thinking through theories of change, but then afterwards being flexible and being open to shaking things up, pivoting and doing that, I think is very important. We try to focus a lot and stay disciplined on how do we measure actual impact. And if you look in your folders, you'll see impact report and other areas that we're getting better and better at of working with our partners. But I think one of the most compelling evidence of success for us that we take is that there's growing demand to work with us. There's growing demand for Cornell to do more in these areas with non-traditional partners. We have partners like the NGOs or companies that you've heard from today and many others that not only return to work with us, that's pretty good if someone's worked with us and say we want to do it again, but look to deepen their engagement or to do more. They want interns, they want longer projects. And then we also have other organizations, ones that we haven't worked with yet, companies, foundations, NGOs that are approaching us cold, asking, could you help us connect on this? It's a really, really good thing, particularly in these times, to be in demand. We can't fulfill all of it now, but people see value in the research to action mission we have, the convening mission we have. And what's also, I think, particularly gratifying is that more and more faculty members see our team and our partnerships team, but also our broader Atkinson team, not just as administrators, give me the funding and I'll send you the report, but as full partners, thinking about how can they be full collaborators in extending the reach of their research and being a part of proposals and being a part of the actual execution of the work. I mentioned this briefly on the panel, but when I came for my first interview for this role, I'd never been in upstate New York, I'd never been to Cornell. I might not have known exactly where Cornell was when I reached out. But after that first interview, I remember driving back to the Syracuse airport and taking the long way through campus and feeling electrified and a bit overwhelmed and driving past all the different colleges, all the different labs, all the research facilities, the greenhouses and the farms. I remember distinctly, and I still pass it now, probably dozens of times since, driving past, 20 minutes later, I'm thinking I'm off campus, and I drive past another Cornell research facility. And I think what a tremendous opportunity for Cornell Atkinson to think about how do we leverage this network? How do we help these people bring and drive impact? It's a tremendous privilege and a tremendous responsibility that I think the Cornell Atkinson team has. And I think we feel lucky that we've built what I think is a model that is providing fruit that can transform this vast potential into targeted solutions for some of the most pressing sustainability challenges. As we've talked about before, this is a critical moment. I do think we have a broad and great Atkinson team. I think we have a lot of trusted relationships on campus and off. And I think we have a template that can really scale. But we do need your guidance. We do need your connections. We do need your support in so many ways if we're going to realize that mission, particularly with some of the headwinds that are facing our broader university and many of our partners. I've dedicated colleagues here in the room that make this work possible. You've heard about some of these projects. We have 115 projects. If you've been watching the Cornell Chronicle, if you've seen some of the videos, you'll see the work of colleagues here. Alan, who's right there, of Cindy, who's over there. Raise your hands, please, so everyone can see you. Cindy, Gal, and Sean and many, many other members of the Atkinson team who are making this possible. And I encourage you to reach out to them during these receptions, reach out to them afterwards and say, how can I help? Ask them for ideas. They are looking for that kind of engagement. And I just want to say that I really do think we can cement and catapult Cornell's role as the most responsive, the most effective, and the preeminent academic partner for these sustainability challenges that we have. Thank you for your time today. My last privilege of today is to be able to introduce David Lodge, the Francis J. DeSalvo Director of Cornell Atkinson. Bring us home, David.
Well, turning it on helps. Okay. So I have been very inspired today. Not that I'm surprised by anything. That would be alarming if I was surprised. But I'm inspired by the work that the members of the Cornell Atkinson team and all the faculty with whom we work and the deans and departments, we work together and we're getting more and more effective at doing that. There was a conversation during the breakout groups that acknowledged that I am retiring at the end of this year, but I am neither lame nor quacking yet. And I will remain committed full steam to this work, continuing through the end of this year. And I also came away from those breakout group reports feeling so excited and encouraged about the future of Cornell Atkinson after me. Because I think you have seen today, we have built such momentum with so many wonderful people at Cornell. There is no question that this kind of work will continue and grow and be even more successful. So I have been inspired by what we've been able to do the last 15 years. And when I say what we have been able to do, I do not mean just Cornell Atkinson. I mean the co-creative efforts of Cornell researchers, our partners in the private sector and government that you've heard from today, some of whom you've heard from today, and the staff. Over the first 15 years of Cornell Atkinson's history, we've learned that to achieve the impacts that society needs, we need to have some non-traditional organizational structures. And you've seen how that has worked. We've done that, and you see that it is really working. We at Cornell Atkinson, though, believe that there is so much future ahead of us. We are just beginning to tap the potential that we have in leveraging Cornell expertise into practice in the world. So we intend at Cornell Atkinson, as much as possible, to help make the future, what I'm suggesting on this slide. We don't just want to respond to the future that others deliver. We want to be part of making that future. So in that context, let me digress just a little bit before I jump to sort of potential futures. When I started as a faculty member 40 years ago, then at the University of Notre Dame, my desire to do research that could inform real-world problems was largely thwarted. It was thwarted by the professional incentives that existed then and still largely exist now in traditional academia, and it was thwarted by the funding agencies that didn't support the kind of work that we're about here. In the last 40 years, three things have changed for the good. First, there are external changes. Some funding sources, including NSF, has moved slowly, incrementally, toward supporting more societally relevant research. It goes by various buzzwords. but it's become more welcoming of applied research, but not even close, I would argue, to where we need to be. And as Jeff Weiss, I think, pointed out with one of his questions or comments earlier today, if you look at the overall federal funding portfolio, in the last 50 years, it's moved, if you look at the ratio of applied research funding to basic research funding, it's changed from about 1.6 to 1. So that's going in the opposite direction that I would argue that we need to be more societally responsive. So that's change number one. There's some good news. There's some bad news on that front. The second change was in me. In my first service on a federal government advisory committee, which was focused on my specialty of invasive species, I was asked by my fellow committee members a whole lot of questions, bunches of questions that it was immediately obvious to me that they were the right questions to be asking. It was horrifying to me to realize immediately also that neither I nor any of my academic international experts on invasive species could answer them. We couldn't answer them because we weren't even asking those questions in our research. So those people wanted to know things like, well, what are the tools that we would have to respond to this important challenge to society, to our economy, to human health, to wildlife health? What would it cost to deploy those tools? And what would the magnitude of the benefit be if we did that? None of those questions could we in the academy answer because we weren't asking the right questions, because those questions were not incentivized in our academic specialties, and the research from basic funding agencies at least wasn't there to support it. So that was an epiphany moment for me, and it made me go back to my lab then and completely overhaul my research program so that we actually ask those questions in our research that people want to know the answer to. It also opened up funding from other more applied agencies, including NOAA, that we just heard such a talk about the importance of NOAA from Toby, and EPA, and from foundations. So, and it started me working with lots of non-academic organizations, because the people that were asking those questions were the representatives of the industries that were importing living animals that sometimes cause these problems, living animals and living plants. So that's the second change. I realized, well, there were ways to do this if I was committed enough and willing to put the time in and willing to look for other kinds of funding sources. The third change is that a high proportion of graduate students and young faculty these days have the same desires that I had 40 years ago. Students and faculty want to be doing research that's going to make a difference. And I think you've seen that on display in spades today in the presentations that you've heard. So I now want to think about potential futures and how we could help make them. I wish at this point in the conversation, after an uplifting day of success stories and partnership examples, that we could just be talking about how to accelerate and grow the models that we've built that are having such success. I wish the conversation about the future was in the context of a political landscape that embraced the issues that we think are important. However, as Mike Kolikoff already pointed out, a little prematurely with the scheme of our program, there is an elephant in the room. And we must start a conversation about what institutional adaptations will be needed as the U.S. federal science landscape changes dramatically around us. So I want to at least begin to outline the potential terms of sort of forward-looking adaptations. And in saying this, I do not want to raise the bar very high. I do not have answers. But we have to acknowledge that what's happening is the changes are happening rapidly. We have to acknowledge that it's highly uncertain how permanent many of these changes will be. But here's my operating assumption going forward. I do not think we will be returning to anything like what we might describe as a a pre-Trump 2 normal. I think the terms of the conversation about federal science and the federal policy landscape around science will be changed, and around universities will be changed, even if many of the changes that are being driven by EOs right now are reversed or slowed or reduced. We're not going to go back to the same landscape. So instead, I think we have to think about this in the terms that Albert Einstein recommends. As we begin to understand the contours of possible future states of federal science funding and federal agencies more generally, not just the science agencies, we need to be looking for the opportunities to emerge more strong and more effective in our research to impact mission. So what will that future look like? So I'm not giving up on, I'm not going to take the strategy of we need to figure out just how to survive. That is not good enough for the societal challenges that we have. We need to be thinking about how there will be opportunities here that we could even emerge with a more rational, more effective federal science and federal science policy, both funding and policy around science, or if not at the federal level, what can we do given the partnerships on display in this room and the many others with which all of us collectively are engaged, could lead to a future that we have a part in making, and that is one we would embrace. So before we look forward, though, consider the evolution of U.S. federal science funding and policy over the past 80 years. Vannevar Bush, pictured on the left-hand side of the slide, who's a PhD engineer from MIT, during World War II, directed the Office of Research and Development. And he submitted, after the war in 1945, he submitted the report that's pictured there to President Truman. It was commissioned by the president. The report is called Science, the Endless Frontier. And the goal of that report was to set up federal institutional structures that would continue the momentum that had been built during World War II, where university research and government research had worked hand in hand, and where universities would be even more empowered, according to the recommendations of this report, which they were. Universities would be empowered to be a really, really strong driver of research at the start of the R&D phase of work that comes originally from universities. So the report led, for example, to the creation of NSF in 1950. Now, during that, Bush, in this report, imagined that the National Science Foundation would be the federal funding organization. But during the 5-year lag between the publication of the report in 1945 and 1950, not surprisingly, the agencies that did already exist, the Atomic Energy Commission, the beginnings of NIH, the Office of Naval Research, they all staked out a bigger turf, expanded, and grew, and were already very prominent in the federal funding landscape also by the time NSF was created in 1950. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can see that the landscape in which we still exist. So this report set the landscape at the federal level that still existed, maybe still exists now. And it is the institutional landscape that has changed very little. The budgets that went along with these agencies, NSF, NIH, ONR, what became eventually the Department of Energy, these agencies have existed. They have grown more or less in lockstep, more or less in proportion to the increase in overall increases in the discretionary federal budget. So we've had a steady march, basically a constant incremental growth in these agencies, but growth consistent with the overall growth of the discretionary federal budget. There have been a few exceptions. The Apollo bump to NASA, driven by President Kennedy, the creation of DOE by President Carter, which was fairly quickly undone, but at least the funding that went along with it by President Reagan, who followed him. the doubling of the NIH budget that was started under President Clinton and concluded by George W. Bush as president. So there have been a few changes, but they've been bumps. And interestingly, they've been bumps. They had an up and they had a down, and we've returned to this steady state, the incrementally growing steady state. One of the most recent bumps was, potential bumps, I should say maybe, was the one led by the Biden administration, where we saw this dramatic increase, at least in industrial policy, that had strong implications for research and development. The CHIPS and Science Act, for example. Some of that, it's not clear to me anyway, how much of that is going to survive, how much of that trajectory is going to remain in place. And now I think we're in the middle, very rapidly on the heels of that potential Biden change in that landscape, with the landscape that is really just the diminution. So far, it seems to be just the diminution of these agencies and, in the long term, their budgets. So that's the landscape we're in. We've now transitioned to the DOGE landscape, and that is apparently the official logo of DOGE. That's the U.S. government logo. That's the best I could find on the web. I'm ready to be corrected, but I found that itself a little jarring. At least it doesn't have an X in it. But the question is, so what's going to happen now? What actually is the trajectory under the Trump administration and the DOGE? That's hard to know. How much of it will stick? But we're not going back to the Vannevar Bush model. And I think there would be many people before, even before the last couple of years, who would have said, well, we could probably optimize the federal science policy and federal budget around science. There'd probably be a lot of improvements we could make. Vannevar Bush started a good thing, but their needs have changed. So can we get to a point where that can happen, where there can be some positive changes, not just a chainsaw approach? So in other words, can we get, even in the face of potentially a lasting lower investment of federal R&D, can we get to keeping this virtuous cycle going? How can that be? So I believe that the problem-driven, mission-driven approach, the applied research approach of Cornell Atkinson could grow, and I think it could be replicated, as Fred and I talked about in our conversation earlier today. We're just offering that as one example. It would be fantastic to see every major university with a Cornell Atkinson-like thing that was accomplished. It was focused on impact. And it would be great if more corporations and more NGOs were engaged in that kind of activity. Is that possible? How can we help to grow that world, that different world, make a different future? So, to the extent that can happen, can it happen in the face of federal contraction? What might be the recipes to go forward? The answers, and how does this look? How does this virtuous cycle look? I can tell you how it looks from the university perspective. How does it look from the perspective of leaders in those the other kinds of organizations represented here, the financial organizations and the corporations and the government agencies? We kind of have an idea of what it looks like in the government agencies. But how does this look? What are those of you in the private sector thinking about the future in this context as well? So I want to begin to close, as you think about those questions, to which I have no answers, with a little more data, a little more granular look at this big picture of U.S. Research and development. I have parsed the best data I could find to focus as much as possible on sustainability and on money going to universities. The data don't all allow that, but as you can see from my label, there's some caveats around that. There's some apples and oranges on this graph, but when I consider the biases that I know from putting these data together, when I consider the biases that are there in those data and the larger data sets from which these data come, I'm confident in these three conclusions. If that orange line, the federal R&D budget devoted to sustainability, plummets with a permanent withdrawal of federal grants and contracts from universities, it will be catastrophic to the U.S. R&D enterprise, unless it's replaced by something else, a different future that we make. And it will be catastrophic for Cornell Atkinson eventually. Second, I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but second, philanthropy in the sustainability space, as you can see from that blue line, has been growing at a very rapid rate. Now, most of that philanthropy goes not to universities, and it goes toward very applied work, which is certainly consistent with our mission, but it doesn't typically go to universities because we're not typically applied enough for the foundation space. But could continued growth in the philanthropy space. It has no hope of filling the gap of federal R&D, but can it grow more? Can we think of ways to leverage and synergize even more with the philanthropic world? Now, that growth itself will be challenged by some of the consequences of the changes that we see going on in Washington right now. The stock market plummeting does not put philanthropists in a good mood. It also has an immediate effect on endowments, quite apart from any endowment taxes that might be coming. So that's the first thing, is that if that orange line plummets, which it seems to be, which would seem to be the intention of the Trump administration, we're in trouble. Philanthropy is growing, but there's I hope we can imagine some hopeful future state of that philanthropy landscape, but it also is indirectly threatened by ongoing changes. So the third thing is that corporate R&D, well, let me set the context. Overall, if you just look at corporate R&D investments, total, not to universities, not in sustainability, they have been growing dramatically over the last decades. And they now surpass, in total, federal R&D investments, excluding defense. So corporate R&D has been growing tremendously, while federal R&D has remained fairly static. And so now corporate R&D is bigger. The portion of that is going outside those corporations and going to sustainability is very low. The portion going to universities is what I pictured here, and it's small, and I'm unable to parse how much of that is going to sustainability, but I'm willing to bet it's a pretty darn small proportion. So could that grow? Could there be more powerful and mutually beneficial partnerships with the corporate sector in this sustainability space? And we heard some comments from others from our private sector panel on that earlier. Just last week, our Cornell colleague Ariel Bobilla-Ortiz, who's an economist, reported with a bunch of colleagues in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that just to keep agricultural productivity in pace with climate change would require a 5 to 8% annual increase in agriculture R&D. Previously, that kind of R&D has come from the USDA. Where is it going to come from now? Are we just going to suffer those steep declines in agricultural productivity as climate continues to change, or will there be sufficient investment and alignment and incentive for some of that R&D to be replaced by the private sector? So for most organizations right now, including universities more or less, prudence, I think, just dictates quite a lot of a strategy of we just have to wait and see how much of this is going to stick. But I really believe it's never too early to thinking about where the opportunity might be and what might otherwise look like a crisis. So how can we develop a stronger applied research portfolio at Cornell Atkinson and universities more broadly that would be more responsive to societal needs and contribute to raising what you have to see is a very battered reputation for elite universities? So I would like to think we can do that. I will conclude with this slide. A challenge to us, getting back just to drive home the point about a potentially plummeting federal R&D in sustainability, is that while Cornell Atkinson, as you've heard Patrick and maybe others say today, we don't seek very many federal contracts and grants. The faculty do that. But those grants and contracts are what drive the left-hand end of this diagram. We add value. At Cornell Atkinson, we add value to the research that is going on in the university. We can't add value to something that doesn't exist. And what is being threatened is the whole infrastructure and intellectual expertise that exists on the left-hand end of that diagram. So that is while our faculty, especially those who got stop work orders in the last couple of days, are feeling this immediately, this will have a huge impact on Cornell Atkinson's ability to continue doing what we're doing if these threats remain in place. So I want to make the point, too, that left-hand end of the diagram, university-based, federally funded R&D since World War II has been a major driver of U.S. productivity growth. According to a recent Federal Reserve report, R&D is responsible for 20% of the productivity growth in the U.S. economy in the last, since World War II. So this is not a nice-to-have thing. This is what has positioned the U.S. economy as a global leader in innovation and economic growth. Given a comment that I think Andreas made earlier today about humans aren't very good at evaluating risk and thinking about timeframes, I'll just note that these studies of the impact of R&D on economic productivity show that there's about a 20-year lag time between the investments in R&D and the signal to the U.S. economy. So we have to think about those kind of timeframes. So we can cut off R&D now and expect to see a very strong signal in the U.S. economy in 20 years. We don't yet, of course, fully understand how important some of the investments we've made in the IIF projects you heard about today and the 95 others that you haven't heard about. We don't know which of those are going to bring those kinds of economic gains in 20 years and which won't, but some of them will if we're able to continue that trajectory and grow them in the ways that Patrick outlined in his final comments. So those huge successes in air pollution, for example, that I started out with the example at the start of the morning, that was the result of a complex, many years flow of information and influence among university researchers, government policy, and private sector scaling of technological innovation in industrial plants, for example. So how can we go forward within a changed landscape, changed budgetary federal landscape, changed institutional landscape, and how can we help to continue the kind of work that will continue to make the U.S. an economic leader? But it's not just about the U.S., it's about improving the quality of human welfare globally when we talk about air pollution and agricultural productivity and the rest. So we're going to be looking for opportunities for that. Reasons for optimism, I think, are some, Patrick already hinted, is that we have a very flexible structure here at Cornell Atkinson. We're just one little organization in one of the many major universities in the United States, though. And of course we have peers who are doing some similar work and thinking about the same things. But we need your help to think about how together we can make a future that we would all like to live in. So the future, to get past the policy paralysis and the potential plummets in funding, we need to imagine a future that continues to aim toward abundant clean energy, that provides all the electricity that we need to restore climate, to grow sufficient, nutritious food sustainably, and to increase the health of people and the planet. At Cornell Atkinson, we will need every bit of the good advice you can give us, and more partnerships than ever. More and more faculty want to do this work. They're clamoring for resources and partnerships to do it, more than we can meet, as Patrick said earlier. But if we continue to be successful, adapting as needed, then I believe we will increase the real and perceived value of the academy to society. And that's an important thing too, because that R&D is partly suffering right now from, I would argue, an earned diminution of reputations of elite universities. And so we need to wrestle with why we're in this position and what we can do about it in the short term and in the long term. So I will close with that. And I was intending to close on a somewhat upbeat message, but I realized that my tone has not been particularly upbeat. But it's reality. When we planned this meeting, you will see that we planned it as a celebration. It has been a celebration. But even in the last 2 days, we see a world that is changing much more dramatically and more draconian ways than we could have imagined. I think we are as well positioned in the institutional adaptations we have made to continue to thrive in the future as any organization, but we will be challenged, and we need your ideas and your help going forward. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Well, I mean, I was asked to